The doctor's hands were shaking. Adrian watched blood pool beneath his wife's unconscious body on the ballroom floor, her pale skin gleaming under chandeliers that cost more than most families earned in a year. Around them, London's elite stood frozen in their jewels and judgment. The child or the woman, the physician said. You must choose now. Everything Adrian had built, every calculated move, every sacrifice principle, every cold decision that had brought him to this moment, collapsed into a single impossible question. What was a legacy worth if it cost him the only person who'd ever made him feel alive? Stay with me. Watch how a marriage of convenience became a revolution. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The solicitor's office smelled like old leather and older money, neither of which Adrian Hale possessed anymore. Your father's debts exceed the estate's value by approximately £42,000, Mr. Pemberton said, adjusting spectacles that probably cost more than Adrian's coat. The creditors are circling. You have, at most, 3 months before forced liquidation. Adrian stared at the mahogany desk between them, watching dust motes drift through afternoon light. 28 years old, a Cambridge education gathering dust alongside his father's empty liquor bottles, and he'd inherited nothing but elegant ruin. There are options, Pemberton continued, his tone suggesting the opposite. Unpleasant options. Marriage. Adrian said it flatly, the word tasting like ashes. The solicitor's eyebrows lifted fractionally, the most emotion Adrian had seen from him in 3 meetings. The Rowan family has expressed interest. Their daughter is of marriageable age, they have capital, you have lineage. It's a practical arrangement. Practical. The word followed Adrian out of that office and into the rain-slicked streets of London, where practical meant selling yourself to stay alive. Where practical meant admitting your father had drunk away 4 generations of careful stewardship in less than a decade. Where practical meant marrying a stranger to save a house you weren't even sure you wanted. The Hale estate sat 40 miles from London, slowly dissolving into the English countryside like sugar in tea. Adrian arrived after dark, because arriving after dark meant he didn't have to see the peeling paint or the overgrown gardens or the servants' quarters, where half the room stood empty because he couldn't afford to pay anyone. Mrs. Talbot met him at the door. The housekeeper who'd stayed on despite 3 months of delayed wages, a woman whose loyalty Adrian didn't understand and couldn't quite accept. You look half drowned, she said, taking his coat. I'll make tea. Don't. Adrian's voice came out sharper than intended. I mean, don't trouble yourself. It's no trouble. That's my job. She disappeared toward the kitchen before he could protest further, leaving Adrian alone in the entrance hall where his ancestors glared down from portraits they'd probably never deserved. The tea appeared anyway. It always did. Mrs. Talbot had a way of simply making things happen, as if the universe bent slightly in her direction out of sheer respect. The Rowan family sent a letter, she said, setting the cup on his father's desk, his desk now, though he still thought of it as belonging to a dead man. It's on the mantel. Adrian didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he sat in the chair that had slowly molded itself to his father's shape over years of sitting there, drinking, watching the estate crumble, while doing absolutely nothing to stop it. The letter's handwriting was feminine, precise, each letter formed with the kind of careful attention that suggested either anxiety or control, possibly both. Mr. Hale, I understand our families have reached an arrangement. I believe in addressing such matters directly. I propose we meet Wednesday next at the Rowan residence in Mayfair, 2 o'clock. I expect honesty. I will offer the same. Miss Eliza Rowan, no pleasantries, no pretense, just straight to the business of binding their lives together like a contract for livestock. Adrian found himself almost respecting it. The Rowan house in Mayfair was everything the Hale estate wasn't, maintained, modern, thriving. Adrian hated it on sight. A butler whose livery probably cost more than Adrian's entire wardrobe led him to a sitting room where Miss Eliza Rowan sat reading a book she didn't put down when he entered. Mr. Hale, she said, still looking at the page. You're 4 minutes early. I appreciate punctuality. Miss Rowan. Adrian remained standing because she hadn't invited him to sit, and because something about her posture, straight-backed, almost rigid, suggested this was a test he didn't know the parameters for. She finally looked up. Adrian had expected, he didn't know what. Beauty, perhaps, or plainness, or some immediately obvious reason why a woman with her family's wealth was being married off to a near-bankrupt gentleman. What he got was a woman of maybe 25 with dark hair pulled back so severely it looked painful, gray eyes that assessed him like he was a column of figures that didn't quite add up, and a face that might have been pretty if it ever softened. It didn't soften. "Sit," she said. "This will be awkward enough without you looming." He sat. Eliza closed her book, something by John Stuart Mill, Adrian noted, and folded her hands in her lap with the precision of someone who'd learned to control every visible aspect of herself. "I'll be frank," she said. "You need money. My family needs respectability and connections to old families. I need—" She paused, and for the first time something flickered across her face. "I need to not be in this house anymore. Honest indeed. I don't see the point in pretense. We're negotiating a transaction." Her voice was cool, almost clinical. "I've read the terms my father proposed. A settlement of £45,000 upon marriage, an additional $10,000 per year. In exchange, you provide legitimacy, social access, and—" Another pause. "An heir, eventually." Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. "You've itemized it. Someone should." Eliza's eyes met his directly. "My father sees this as purchasing access to your family name and parliamentary connections. You presumably see it as salvation from bankruptcy. I see it as the best available option in a series of increasingly poor choices." What a romantic vision of matrimony. "Romance is for people with options, Mr. Hale. We have necessities." She stood, walked to the window overlooking Mayfair's manicured streets. "I'm 26. In my family's estimation, that makes me nearly expired merchandise. I've refused 3 prior proposals because the men were either stupid, cruel, or both. You appear to be neither, though I could be wrong. That's the kindest assessment of my character I've heard in months. I doubt kindness will be a defining feature of our arrangement." Eliza turned from the window. "But I'll be clear about my expectations. I won't be hidden away in the countryside to produce children while you maintain a separate life in London. I won't be treated as property or decoration. I expect to be consulted on household decisions, financial matters, and anything else that affects my life. In exchange, I'll manage your estate efficiently, maintain social obligations, and eventually fulfill the biological requirements of this contract." The way she said biological requirements made it sound like a tax assessment. "You've given this considerable thought," Adrian said. "I've had considerable time. When you're a woman whose family considers her a problem to be solved, you learn to think ahead." Something bitter edged into her voice. "Do we have an understanding, Mr. Hale?" Adrian looked at her, this strange, rigid woman who spoke of marriage like a business merger and carried herself like she was always braced for a blow. He thought of the estate slowly dying, of Mrs. Talbot's unpaid loyalty, of his father's portrait watching him fail in slow motion. "We have an understanding, Miss Rowan." "Good." She sat again, retrieving her book. "The wedding will be in 6 weeks. My father insists on a proper ceremony despite the practical nature of the arrangement. I hope you own suitable clothing. I'll manage." "See that you do. First impressions matter, even in transactions." Adrian stood to leave, then paused. "May I ask a question?" Eliza looked up, guarded. "You may ask." "Why are you so angry?" Her face went absolutely still. For several seconds she didn't speak, and Adrian thought perhaps he'd miscalculated, pushed too far past the careful boundaries she'd established. "Because anger," she finally said, "is more useful than despair." She returned to her book, and Adrian understood the conversation was over. Yes, the wedding was exactly as miserable as Adrian had anticipated. St. George's in Hanover Square, filled with people who'd come to watch a gentleman in decline marry money, all of them performing sympathy while cataloging every detail to gossip about later. Eliza arrived in ivory silk that probably cost a year of his former income, her face composed and unreadable behind a veil that mercifully hid whatever she was thinking. They spoke vows that promised love and devotion neither of them felt. The reception afterward was worse, a performance of normalcy in the Rowans' Mayfair ballroom, while Eliza's father, Edmund Rowan, worked the room like he'd just closed the business deal of his life, which, Adrian supposed, he had. "Your wife looks well," someone said. Adrian didn't catch who. The faces had started blurring together after the 4th glass of champagne he shouldn't be drinking. "She does," he agreed, watching Eliza across the room, speaking to someone with that same controlled politeness she'd shown him. Everything about her was controlled. Her posture, her expressions, the exact amount of smiles she deployed for each category of guest. Rowan's daughter, another voice said. They say she's brilliant with figures, ran her father's household accounts for years. How progressive. How unmarriageable, you mean? No man wants a wife who's cleverer than him. Adrian turned to see who'd said it, some florid gentleman whose waistcoat strained against his gut, and felt an unexpected flash of irritation. Then perhaps men should be cleverer. He walked away before the man could respond, weaving through the crowd toward the balcony where the air might be less suffocating. Eliza found him there 20 minutes later. Hiding? She asked. Strategically retreating. I see. She stood beside him, careful to maintain a foot of distance. We should leave soon. It's expected. Expected. The wedding night. She said it flatly, like announcing the weather. I assume you'll want to fulfill that aspect of the arrangement. Adrian looked at her. Really looked. In the gaslight from the ballroom, he could see tension in every line of her body, the way her hands gripped the balcony rail too tightly, the careful blankness of her expression that wasn't quite hiding something that looked like dread. Not tonight, he said quietly. Eliza's head turned sharply toward him. What? We're both exhausted. We've just spent 6 hours performing for people who don't matter. I think we can delay the biological requirements. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, more like confusion that relief was even possible. That's unexpected. I'm occasionally capable of unexpected behavior. The arrangement will still exist tomorrow, and the day after that. We have time, Miss Rowan. He paused. Mrs. Hale. She flinched slightly at the name. I haven't gotten used to that yet. Neither have I. They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by contract, neither quite sure what to do with the unexpected grace of postponement. Thank you, Eliza said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. Don't thank me for basic decency. The bar shouldn't be that low. And yet, she turned to face the ballroom again. We should circulate once more before departing. Appearances matter. Of course they do. They went back inside together, maintaining their careful distance, performing the roles they'd signed up for while the crowd watched and judged and calculated the odds of this peculiar marriage surviving the year, Chad. The Hale estate looked worse in daylight. Eliza stood in the entrance hall the next morning, taking inventory with the same systematic precision she'd probably applied to her father's accounts. Adrian watched her catalog each crack in the plaster, each water stain on the ceiling, each piece of furniture that was one generation past respectable. The roof needs replacing, she said. Yes. The east wing appears to be closed entirely. Can't afford to heat it. The gardens are dead. Yes, I'm aware. Adrian felt something sharp in his chest. Did you want the full list of failures? I can provide it alphabetically if that helps. Eliza turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. I'm not cataloging failures, Mr. Hale. I'm assessing priorities. What's the difference? Intent. She walked toward what had been the drawing room where sheets covered furniture no one had sat on in years. Failures are endings. Priorities are where you start rebuilding. Mrs. Talbot appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Hale, I've prepared the master bedroom. Will you be needing anything else? Eliza glanced at Adrian, something questioning in her eyes. Separate rooms, Adrian said. For now. If Mrs. Talbot found this odd, she didn't show it. As you wish. The blue room is suitable, if Mrs. Hale approves. I'm sure it's fine, Eliza said. Thank you, Mrs. Talbot. The housekeeper nodded and disappeared, leaving them alone in the sheet-draped room. You'll scandalize the servants, Eliza said. I'm fairly certain Mrs. Talbot is beyond scandal. She's seen this house at its worst. Adrian pulled a sheet off a chair, dust rising in the afternoon light. Besides, she's the only servant left. Who's she going to tell? The only... Eliza stopped. You have one servant? In an estate this size? I had 3. The others left when I couldn't pay them. He sat in the newly revealed chair, which creaked ominously. Mrs. Talbot stayed. I still don't know why. Perhaps she believes in the place. Then she's more optimistic than I am. Eliza studied him for a long moment. You really have given up, haven't you? I prefer to think of it as being realistic about insurmountable odds. How very dramatic. She pulled another sheet off, revealing a writing desk with water damage staining its surface. Self-pity doesn't actually solve anything, you know? Adrian felt irritation spike. I'm not asking for your pity. Good, because I don't have any to spare. Eliza ran her finger along the desk's damaged surface. I'm asking what you actually want to do. Not what you think is possible. What you want. What I want? Adrian laughed, the sound bitter even to his own ears. I want my father to not have drunk away everything my family built. I want to not be in debt to your father. I want to not have married a stranger to avoid bankruptcy. But we don't get what we want, do we? We get what we can survive. How poetic. Eliza's voice was desert dry. And how utterly useless. Excuse me? She turned to face him fully, her gray eyes sharp. You've spent this entire conversation explaining why everything is impossible. The roof can't be fixed, the gardens can't be restored, the debt can't be managed. You've accepted defeat before even trying. It's pathetic. Adrian stood, anger flashing hot. You've been here all of 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes I've seen more than you apparently have in months. Yes, the estate is damaged. Yes, you're in debt. Yes, your father was irresponsible. She stepped closer. But you have 45,000 pounds coming, a functioning brain, and a housekeeper who inexplicably believes in this place. That's more than most people start with. You don't understand. I understand that you've married me to save this estate, and if you're too defeated to actually try saving it, then what exactly was the point of any of this? They stood 3 feet apart, both breathing harder than the argument warranted. Adrian could see calculation in Eliza's eyes, but also something else. Frustration, maybe, or disappointment that he wasn't whatever she'd hoped he might be. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I want you to stop mourning what's dead and start fighting for what isn't. Eliza pulled another sheet off, revealing a settee with good bones despite the worn upholstery. I want you to remember that marriage is supposedly a partnership, which means I'm not just here to produce an heir and look decorative. I want you to accept that I'm going to involve myself in fixing this disaster, whether you like it or not, because it's my disaster now, too. I didn't ask for your help. No, you asked for my money. The help comes free. She moved to the window, looking out at the tangled gardens. Mrs. Talbot seems competent. Tomorrow I'll review the full household accounts and create a proper budget. We'll need to hire at least 2 more servants. The house is too large for one person. The roof is priority, but the gardens... She paused. The gardens could be recovered. It would take work. Adrian watched her transform his failure into a task list, speaking with the same clinical precision she'd used to discuss their marriage terms. She wasn't offering comfort or sympathy. She was offering something more insulting and more useful, competence. You're serious, he said. Did you think I was joking? Eliza turned from the window. I told you in London, I won't be hidden away. I won't be useless. If I'm going to be trapped in a loveless marriage in a dying estate, I'm at least going to make something of it. That's remarkably grim. That's remarkably honest. She walked toward the door, then paused. I'll take dinner in my room tonight. Tomorrow, we'll start properly. She left before he could respond, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. Adrian sat back in the creaking chair, surrounded by dust-covered furniture and water-damaged walls, trying to process what had just happened. He'd expected, what? A wife who would accept the situation passively? Who would perform her duties and otherwise leave him alone? Instead, he'd gotten Eliza Rowan, Eliza Hale now, who looked at insurmountable problems and saw priorities, who spoke about fighting when he'd already surrendered, who refused to pretend this marriage was anything but a transaction while simultaneously insisting they actually make something of it. Mrs. Talbot appeared in the doorway. She's got spirit, that one. She's got opinions. About time someone did. The housekeeper smiled slightly. This house has been dying quietly for too long. Maybe it needs someone willing to be loud about living. But the screaming started at 3 in the morning. Adrian jerked awake, heart hammering, trying to orient himself. The sound came again, raw, terrified, unmistakably from the blue room where Eliza slept. He was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up, taking the hallway in his nightshirt, throwing open her door without knocking. Eliza sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide but unseeing, hands clawing at invisible threats, making sounds that weren't quite words, just pure fear given voice. Eliza! Adrian approached carefully, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. Eliza, wake up. She didn't seem to hear him, still trapped in whatever nightmare had her in its grip. Adrian did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed her shoulders and said her name sharply. Eliza, you're dreaming. Wake up. Her eyes focused suddenly, fixing on him with such raw terror that Adrian actually stepped back. Then recognition flooded in, followed immediately by horror at her own vulnerability. Her voice came out ragged. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. Adrian grabbed the water pitcher from her bedside table, poured a glass with shaking hands. Here. She took it but didn't drink, just held the glass like an anchor to reality. Her hands were trembling so badly water sloshed over the rim. How often? Adrian asked quietly. What? How often do you have nightmares like that? Eliza's face closed off immediately, that familiar rigid control slamming back into place. It's nothing, just a dream. I'm fine. You're not fine, you're shaking. I said I'm fine. Her voice went sharp, brittle. You can leave, I don't need supervision. Adrian should have left. Should have respected the walls she was frantically rebuilding, retreated to his own room and pretended he hadn't seen her absolutely shattered. Instead, he sat in the chair by her bed. What are you doing? Eliza demanded. Sitting. I can see that. Why? Because you're terrified and trying very hard to pretend you're not. And I think leaving you alone right now would be cruel. He settled back in the chair. So I'm sitting. You don't have to talk. You don't have to explain. But you don't have to be alone either. For a long moment, Eliza just stared at him, her expression cycling through anger and confusion, and something that might have been desperate gratitude she couldn't quite admit to. This doesn't change anything, she finally said. I know. We're still just a transaction. I know that too. I'm not going to suddenly become your devoted wife because you showed basic human decency during a nightmare. I wouldn't expect you to. Eliza pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, making herself smaller, Adrian realized, like she was trying to disappear. They're always the same, she said quietly. The dreams, always about being trapped, locked in, no way out, screaming, and no one hearing. Adrian didn't respond, sensing that anything he said would just make her retreat further. My father's house, Eliza continued, her voice distant now. It was beautiful, perfect, and so fucking suffocating I thought I'd die there. Every rule, every expectation, every moment watched and controlled and judged. Be proper, be quiet, be marriageable, be anything except actually yourself. Her laugh was harsh. And now I've just traded one cage for another, haven't I? Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? She looked at him directly. A marriage I didn't choose to a man I don't know in a house that's falling apart. Different walls, same trap. Adrian thought about his own father, drinking himself to death in this same house while refusing to see it decay around him. About inheriting failure and shame and not knowing how to do anything but watch it continue. About marrying a stranger because the alternative was losing even the illusion of control. Maybe, he said slowly, we're both trapped, but at least we're trapped together. That has to count for something. Eliza's eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears, though she blinked them away before they could fall. Why are you being kind? Would you prefer I wasn't? I'd prefer I could predict you. She wiped at her face roughly. You're supposed to be the cold gentleman who married me for money. You're not supposed to sit with me through nightmares. I'm full of surprises. I don't like surprises. I've noticed. Adrian stood, moving toward the door. I'll leave you alone now, but if you need anything, I won't. Eliza cut him off, that sharp edge back in her voice. I don't need anything. Adrian paused at the door, looking back at her, this strange, damaged woman who fought so hard to need nothing from anyone. Yes, you do. We all do. That's not weakness. It's just human. He left before she could argue, returning to his own room where sleep took hours to find again. In the morning, neither of them mentioned it, but something had shifted anyway. Eliza attacked the estate's problems with a methodical fury that was almost frightening to watch. Within a week, she'd reviewed every account, cataloged every expense, identified every inefficiency. She hired 2 servants, a young maid named Anna and a groundskeeper named Thomas, who looked skeptical about the whole enterprise but needed the work. The roof repair will cost approximately £800, she announced at breakfast on the 8th day, spreading papers across the table like battle plans. The gardens will need initial investment of $200 for proper tools and soil amendments. Livestock, chickens at minimum, possibly goats, another $100. We need those as working animals, not luxury. Adrian looked at her over his coffee, trying to keep up. You've costed livestock. I've costed everything. She tapped one of the papers. Your estate has been operating at a loss for years because no one bothered to make it actually productive. Land this size should be generating income, not just consuming it. My father didn't believe in commerce. He thought it beneath the family dignity. Your father was an idiot. Eliza said it flatly, without malice, just stating obvious fact. Dignity doesn't pay bills, work does. Adrian found himself almost smiling. You have strong opinions about dead men you never met. I have strong opinions about incompetence generally. The deadness is incidental. She pulled out another paper. I've also found 3 families in the village who would be willing to rent parts of the unused East Wing as housing. Not much, maybe £40 a year, but it's income, and it keeps the building from rotting further. Rent out the family home? Adrian said it automatically, his father's voice in his head about propriety and appearances. Eliza looked at him with those sharp gray eyes. Would you prefer to keep it empty as a monument to past glory, or would you prefer to have money for the roof repair? Put like that, there wasn't much argument. You've thought of everything, Adrian said. Someone needed to. She gathered her papers with precise movements. I'm going to the village today to speak with the families about the East Wing. Thomas is starting on clearing the garden paths. Anna is reorganizing the kitchen storage, which is apparently a disaster. What are you doing? The question landed like an accusation, which maybe it was. I have correspondence, Adrian said vaguely. With whom? Your creditors are satisfied. Your father's friends are mostly dead or drunk. Who exactly are you corresponding with? Parliamentary matters. You're not in Parliament. I could be. My family has a traditional seat in nothing, currently, because you haven't bothered to activate it. Eliza stood, papers tucked under her arm. If you're going to hide in this house writing meaningless letters while I actually fix things, at least be honest about it. She left before Adrian could defend himself, though he wasn't sure what defense he'd offer anyway. She was right. He'd been drifting, letting her drive forward while he pretended correspondence and research and careful thought were the same as action. Mrs. Talbot appeared from the kitchen carrying fresh tea. She's something, isn't she? She's exhausting. She's alive. The housekeeper poured his cup. This house has been dead for so long I'd forgotten what alive looked like. It's loud. It's demanding. It doesn't give you time to feel sorry for yourself. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. Of course not, sir. Mrs. Talbot's tone suggested she believed the opposite. Will you be wanting lunch, or will you be too busy with your very important correspondence? Even the servants were turning on him. Adrian abandoned his correspondence and went to find Thomas in the gardens. The groundskeeper was knee-deep in weeds, cutting back growth that had probably been accumulating for 5 years. He looked up when Adrian approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. Mr. Hale. Thomas, Adrian looked at the tangled mess around them. This seems impossible. Most worthwhile things do, sir. Thomas went back to cutting. Mrs. Hale seems to think it's salvageable. Mrs. Hale thinks everything is salvageable. Better than thinking nothing is, I'd say. Adrian grabbed a second pair of shears from Thomas's tool bag. Where should I start? Thomas looked surprised. You're helping? Apparently I need to do something other than write meaningless letters. Adrian attacked a particularly vicious thorn bush. Might as well be this. They worked in silence for an hour, cutting and clearing, revealing bones of what had once been carefully designed garden paths. It was hard, dirty work. Adrian's hands blistered, sweat soaked through his shirt, his back ached. It felt better than he'd felt in months. There's roses, Thomas said, pointing to a tangled mass near what might have been a fountain once. Under all that mess. Good stock, too, if they haven't died entirely. Roses. Your grandmother's, I'd wager. Martha, Mrs. Talbot, she mentioned the old lady loved her rose garden. Before everything fell apart. Before his father gave up. Before decay became the house's defining feature. Adrian moved toward the tangled mass, started carefully cutting away the choking growth. Thorns tore at his hands, but he kept going, and gradually, impossibly, he found green underneath. Life, stubborn and determined, refusing to die just because no one was caring for it. They're alive, he said, almost to himself. Things usually are, Thomas replied, if you bother to look. Eliza returned from the village to find Adrian bleeding in the garden. What happened? She was beside him before he could answer, grabbing his hand to examine the thorn cuts. Roses, Adrian said stupidly. My grandmother's roses. They're still alive. You're injured. They're superficial. They're bleeding. Eliza was already pulling him toward the house. "Mrs. Talbot, I need clean water and bandages." Adrian let himself be dragged, too surprised by her sudden concern to resist. She deposited him in the kitchen, where Mrs. Talbot appeared with supplies and a knowing look. "I'll just leave you to it," the housekeeper said, disappearing again. Eliza cleaned the cuts with efficiency, but not gentleness, her hands steady despite the sharp movements. "You should have worn gloves." I didn't think about it. Clearly. She wrapped bandages around his palm, pulling them tighter than strictly necessary. "You realize you're a gentleman, not a groundskeeper. Thomas needed help. Thomas was hired to do that work. You have other responsibilities." "Like what? Writing meaningless correspondence?" Adrian threw her own accusation back at her. Eliza paused, meeting his eyes for the first time since she'd started bandaging him. "You were listening." "You weren't exactly quiet." "I'm rarely quiet. It's one of my many charms." She finished the bandage, but didn't let go of his hand immediately. "The families will take the East Wing rooms. £45 annual income, paid quarterly." "That's good." "It's a start." She finally released his hand, standing to wash her own. "The village also needs a decent road. Currently, it's nearly impassable in winter. If we organize the repair, share costs with other landowners, it would benefit everyone, including our tenants who could actually get their goods to market." "Exactly." Eliza dried her hands with precise movements. "I also heard there's a teaching position open at the village school. They can't pay much, but it's respectable work." "Are you applying?" She laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound. "Me? Teach children? I'd terrify them. No, I thought. Anna mentioned she can read and write. She might be interested. If she is, we could adjust her schedule here to allow it." Adrian stared at her. "You'd reorganize the household to let a maid teach school?" "Why not? She'd be better used that way. We can manage with fewer hours from her, and the village needs competent teachers." Eliza turned to face him fully. "Not everything has to be about what benefits us directly. Sometimes fixing the larger problems around you ends up fixing your own problems, too." "That's remarkably optimistic coming from you. That's remarkably pragmatic." But something softened slightly in her expression. "The roses. You really found them?" "Barely. They're overgrown and probably dying, but there's green underneath. Thomas thinks they might recover." "Show me." They walked out together as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the tangled garden in gold light. Adrian led her to where he'd been working, where the cleared growth revealed stubborn green shoots beneath. Eliza knelt beside the roses, running her fingers carefully along the stems. "My mother had roses. Before she died. I was young, but I remember she used to say they were proof that beautiful things could have thorns and thorny things could be beautiful." Sounds like a smart woman. She was. And miserable. Beautiful, accomplished, intelligent, and completely trapped in a marriage to my father, who valued her primarily for producing a male heir she never managed to deliver. Eliza's voice went distant. "She died trying, actually. Childbirth complications with what would have been a son. He lived 3 days." Adrian didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "I used to think," Eliza continued quietly, "that I'd never let myself be trapped like she was. That I'd stay unmarried rather than end up in a cage with roses." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "And here I am anyway, married to a stranger, expected to produce an heir, following the same path to the same trap. It doesn't have to be the same, doesn't it?" She looked at him directly. "We made a transaction, Adrian. You needed money. I needed escape from my father's house. We'll live together, fulfill our obligations, and maybe if we're very lucky, we'll manage not to hate each other. That's the best we can reasonably hope for." "Is it? What else would there be?" Adrian thought about that question long after Eliza went inside, leaving him alone with the rescued roses and the failing light. What else could there be in a marriage built on necessity? What grew in ground that had never been prepared for anything but survival? He didn't have an answer. But for the first time since his father died, he thought maybe finding one might be worth the effort. The roses became Eliza's obsession. Every morning she was out there before breakfast, working alongside Thomas with a determination that bordered on aggressive. She'd acquired books on horticulture from somewhere, Adrian didn't ask where, and consulted them like battle plans, marking pages and making notes and margins with that same precise handwriting from her first letter. "You're going to exhaust yourself," Adrian said one morning, watching her prune with methodical violence. "I'm going to save them." She didn't look up. They've survived years of neglect. The least I can do is give them a fighting chance. Adrian heard the unspoken parallel. She was talking about more than roses. But he'd learned that Eliza said what she meant when she was ready, and pushing only made her retreat into that rigid control. The estate slowly transformed around them. The roof repair started, workers hammering overhead while Eliza negotiated prices with a ruthlessness that made the contractors visibly nervous. The East Wing tenants moved in. 3 families who looked at the Hales with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, like they weren't quite sure this charity wouldn't be snatched back. "We're not doing charity," Eliza told Adrian when he mentioned it. "We're doing business. They pay rent, we maintain the building. It's equitable." "You gave them the first month free." "That's just practical. They needed time to move their things." But her cheeks colored slightly, and Adrian realized she was embarrassed to be caught being kind. 6 weeks into the marriage, they'd fallen into a routine. Breakfast together, where Eliza discussed plans and Adrian mostly listened. Days spent on separate projects, her with the gardens and household management, him increasingly involved with the tenant relations and local governance matters he'd been ignoring for years. Dinners where they talked about practical things, carefully avoiding anything personal. It was almost comfortable in a strange way, like they were business partners who happened to share a house. Then Edmund Rowan came to visit. Adrian disliked Eliza's father on sight, which happened about 3 seconds after the man's carriage pulled up to their door with an ostentation that seemed designed to emphasize how much grander his life was than theirs. "Father?" Eliza's voice went flat when she greeted him, all the life draining out of her posture. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Edmund Rowan was tall, silver-haired, handsome in the way powerful men often were, more presence than actual features. "I haven't heard from my daughter in 6 weeks. I thought I should ensure you were still alive. As you can see, I'm thriving." Thriving. Edmund looked around the entrance hall with obvious assessment. "Yes, I can see the improvements, though perhaps thriving is ambitious for a house that still needs considerable work." Adrian stepped forward. "Mr. Rowan, welcome." "Hail." Edmund's handshake was too firm, designed to dominate. "I trust you're treating my investment appropriately." "Your investment?" The words came out sharper than Adrian intended. "My daughter. I did provide £45,000 for her upkeep." Edmund smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I like to ensure my capital is being properly managed." Eliza's face had gone absolutely rigid. "Perhaps we should take tea in the drawing room." Tea was an exercise in barely concealed hostility. Edmund catalogued every improvement, every expense, every decision Eliza had made, framing each as either wasteful or insufficient. The roses were frivolous. The tenant housing was beneath their station. The road repair was someone else's responsibility. "You're here to manage a household and produce an heir," Edmund said, setting down his cup with precise force. "Not to play at being some sort of rural reformer." "I'm doing both," Eliza said quietly. "Are you?" Edmund's eyes flicked to Adrian. 6 weeks married. Should we be expecting announcements?" The silence that followed was excruciating. "These things take time," Adrian said finally. "Do they? I was under the impression that was the primary purpose of this arrangement." Edmund leaned back. "I didn't invest in companionship, Hale. I invested in lineage. My daughter understands her obligations." Eliza's teacup rattled slightly as she set it down. "I need to check on dinner preparations." She fled before either of them could respond. Adrian and Edmund sat in loaded silence for several moments. "She's doing remarkable work here," Adrian said, keeping his voice level. "The estate was failing when I inherited it. Eliza's management has been—" "I don't care about the estate," Edmund cut him off. "I care about securing my family's connection to yours through a legitimate male heir. Everything else is secondary." He stood, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. "I'll be staying the night. I expect we'll have more to discuss tomorrow." He left Adrian alone with his rage and the growing realization that Eliza hadn't escaped her cage at all. She'd just moved to a larger one with different bars. Adrian found her in the rose garden after dark, sitting on the ground beside the plant she'd been nursing back to life, her arms wrapped around her knees. "He's gone to bed," Adrian said quietly. "Guest room in the East Wing." "How generous of us to house him," Eliza's voice was hollow. "Did he express satisfaction with his investment?" "Eliza, don't!" She cut him off. "Don't try to make it better. You heard him. I'm capital. a transaction. The only thing that matters is whether I fulfill the biological requirements of the contract. Adrian sat beside her, close enough to feel the tension radiating off her body. What he thinks doesn't matter. Doesn't it? He's right. That was the arrangement. I marry you, provide an heir, secure his social connections. Everything else is just dressing up the transaction in prettier language. It doesn't have to be what? Eliza turned to face him, and in the moonlight he could see tears on her face she wasn't bothering to hide. What doesn't it have to be? A business deal? A calculated exchange of money for breeding stock? Because that's exactly what it is, Adrian. That's what we both agreed to. We also agreed to be partners. Partners in what? You needed my money. I needed escape from my father's house. Except I didn't escape, did I? I just traded being controlled by him for being controlled by the expectations of this marriage. Different walls, same cage. I was right the first time. Adrian felt something crack open in his chest. Anger at Edmund Rowan, at the circumstances that had forced them both into this position, at himself for not seeing how much Eliza was still trapped. What do you want? He asked. What? Not what's expected, not what's practical. What do you actually want? Eliza laughed, the sound broken. That's not a question people like us get to answer. Answer it anyway. She was quiet for so long Adrian thought she wouldn't respond. Then barely audible. I want to matter. Not as someone's daughter or someone's wife or someone's potential mother, just as myself. I want to do something that's mine, that has value because I chose it, not because it fulfills someone else's requirements. She wiped at her face roughly. Pathetic, isn't it? It's human. It's impossible. Adrian thought about the roses surrounding them, stubborn green life fighting through years of neglect. About Eliza's systematic assault on the estate's problems, the way she'd reorganized everything from household accounts to village relations. About how she'd never once asked for credit or recognition, just kept driving forward like stopping meant death. The school, he said suddenly. Eliza looked at him, confused. What? The village school. You said they needed help, that it was underfunded and overcrowded. What if... He was thinking out loud now, the idea forming as he spoke. What if we built another one? Here, on the estate. A real school properly funded. Not just for the wealthy, for anyone. The tenant children, the village children, anyone who wants to learn. That's insane, is it? We have the space in the East Wing. We have enough income now to fund it if we're careful. And it would actually do something, Eliza. Something that matters. Something that's yours. My father would never. Your father doesn't get a vote. Adrian felt certainty settling in his bones. This is our estate. Our decision. If we want to turn part of it into a school, we can. Eliza stared at him like he'd suggested burning the house down. You're serious? Completely. It would be scandalous, educating the poor on an estate like this. People would think we'd lost our minds. Let them think what they want. It would be expensive. You're the one who manages the accounts. Can we afford it? Eliza's mind was already working. Adrian could see it, calculating costs, assessing feasibility, finding the practical path through an impractical idea. If we're very careful, if we keep expenses low and find teachers willing to work for modest pay, if we charge some tuition from families who can afford it to subsidize those who can't, she paused. It would be difficult. Most worthwhile things are. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Not hope exactly. Eliza was too practical for hope. But maybe possibility. Why are you suggesting this? Because you asked what you want. And this seems like it might be something worth wanting. Because I'm tired of watching you exhaust yourself on my father's failures while treating your own ambitions like they're frivolous. Because... Adrian stopped, surprised by his own honesty. Because I think you deserve to build something that's yours. Eliza's breath caught. You barely know me. I know you've managed to resurrect a dying estate in 6 weeks through sheer stubborn competence. I know you care more than you want to admit about things that don't directly benefit you. I know you're brilliant and angry and trapped, and maybe a school won't fix that, but at least it's something. This isn't part of the arrangement. No, it's not. Adrian stood, offered her his hand. Consider it an amendment to the contract. Eliza looked at his hand like it might bite her. Then slowly, she took it and let him pull her to her feet. My father will be furious, she said. I'm counting on it. For the first time since Adrian had known her, Eliza smiled. A real smile, not the controlled version she deployed for social occasions. It transformed her face, made her look younger and fiercer and absolutely dangerous. "All right," she said, "let's build a school." Edmund Rowan's fury the next morning was spectacular. "A school!" His voice could have shattered crystal. "You want to turn part of this estate into a charity school for peasant children?" "Not charity," Eliza said calmly, though Adrian could see tension in every line of her body. "A properly funded educational institution. We'll charge tuition on a sliding scale based on ability to pay." "That's charity with extra steps. That's investment in the community." Eliza pulled out papers she'd apparently been working on since last night. "The village has been declining for years. Young people leave because there's no opportunity. Crime increases because there's no alternative. Property values, including ours, suffer because the area is seen as backwards and poor." She spread the papers on the breakfast table. "A school changes that. It creates opportunity, which keeps families here, which supports local business, which increases overall prosperity. Everyone benefits, including your reputation as an eccentric who's wasted her husband's money on radical social experiments." Edmund's face had gone red. "Do you have any idea how this will look? The daughter of Edmund Rowan running a school for gutter snipes?" "The wife of Adrian Hale," Eliza corrected, her voice going sharp. "Running a school on her own estate. You don't get a say in this, Father. You don't own me anymore." "I provided £45,000, which went to my husband as settlement, not as ongoing ownership rights." Eliza stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "You wanted me married into an old family with social connections. Done. The contract is fulfilled. What Adrian and I do with our estate is none of your concern." Edmund turned to Adrian, clearly expecting male solidarity. "You're going to allow this?" "Allow?" Adrian felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. "I'm going to help fund it. Eliza's right. This benefits everyone, including us. And more importantly, it's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Edmund's laugh was ugly. "You're as naive as she is. Do you think the nobility will accept you running a charity school? Do you think your peers won't mock you? You'll be laughingstock, both of you. Bleeding hearts playing at reform while the real world operates on practical principles. Like selling your daughter for social advancement?" The words were out before Adrian could stop them. The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund's face went from red to white, fury radiating off him like heat. "How dare you? How dare I state the obvious?" Adrian stood as well, surprised by his own anger. "You arranged this marriage for your benefit, not hers. You talk about investment and returns like she's a financial instrument. You show up unannounced to assess whether your capital is being properly managed. And now you're angry that she's found something meaningful to do with her life because it doesn't serve your social climbing ambitions. You forgot your place, Hale. No, you forgot yours." Adrian moved to stand beside Eliza, a united front. "This is our home, our estate, our decision. You're a guest here, and not a particularly welcome one at this moment." Edmund looked between them, seeming to finally grasp that he'd lost control of the situation. His daughter had found an ally, and together they were rejecting his authority. "You'll regret this," he said finally, his voice ice. "Both of you. When society turns on you, when your reputation is destroyed, when this ridiculous school fails and takes whatever's left of your finances with it, remember that I warned you." "We'll take that risk," Eliza said quietly. Edmund grabbed his coat. "I'm leaving. Immediately. Don't expect further support from me when this disaster unfolds." "We weren't expecting support anyway," Adrian said. "Just absence, which you're providing admirably." Edmund Rowan left in a fury of slammed doors and shouted orders to his driver. His carriage disappeared down the drive in a cloud of dust and outrage, leaving Adrian and Eliza standing together in the sudden silence. "Well," Eliza said after a moment, "that went poorly." "That went perfectly." Adrian felt almost giddy. "Did you see his face when you told him he didn't own you anymore? I think I may have just severed all family ties." "Good. He's terrible." Eliza laughed, a surprised, slightly hysterical sound. "I can't believe you called him out for selling me." "I can't believe I didn't do it sooner." Adrian turned to face her fully. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." Eliza's hands were shaking slightly. I've never stood up to him like that. Never told him no about anything important." "How does it feel?" She considered for a moment. "Terrifying. Liberating. Like I might throw up or fly or possibly both." Her eyes met his. You didn't have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. Why? Adrian thought about all the careful distance they'd maintained, the transaction-focused language, the way they'd both pretended this was purely practical. And he realized something had shifted, probably had been shifting for weeks, in conversations over breakfast and work in the gardens, and quiet moments when they'd let their guards drop just slightly. Because you're my wife, he said simply. Not in the transactional sense your father means, but in the actual sense. We're partners. We're in this together, and I'm not going to stand by while he treats you like property. Eliza's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. The arrangement... Forget the arrangement. Adrian surprised himself with how much he meant it. We're past that now. We're building something real here. The estate, the school, us. Whatever this is between us, it's more than a transaction. At least, I'd like it to be. I don't know how to do that, Eliza admitted quietly. Be married is more than just a contract. My parents' marriage was miserable. My father's treatment of my mother... She stopped, swallowing hard. I don't know what the alternative looks like. Neither do I. My father was barely functional for most of my life. Adrian took a careful step closer. But maybe we can figure it out together. No expectations, no requirements, just see what happens when two people actually try to build something instead of just surviving. That's remarkably optimistic for someone who was suicidal with resignation 6 weeks ago. I had good motivation to change. The money? You. Adrian said it before he could overthink it. You came in here angry and competent and refusing to accept failure, and you didn't let me wallow. You made me work. You made me care about something other than managing decline. You're extraordinary, Eliza, and I think if we actually work together, really together, not just coexisting, we could do something remarkable. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief and hope and fear. You're serious about the school? Completely. It's going to be difficult. People will talk. Your social standing could suffer. Let it suffer. I'd rather have purpose than approval. That's very noble. That's very practical, Adrian countered, echoing her earlier words. A school serves the community, which strengthens the region, which benefits us. Plus, it gives you something meaningful to build. That's worth more than whatever gossip might circulate in London drawing rooms. Eliza was quiet, that analytical mind clearly working through implications and possibilities. Finally, she nodded, decision made. All right, we'll need to convert the East Wing's upper floor. The tenant housing is just ground level, so we have space. We'll need teachers, materials, a proper curriculum. We should start small, maybe 20 students initially, and expand if it works. When it works? If. But she was smiling slightly. I'll need to visit other schools, see how they're structured. We should talk to the village families, gauge interest. And we need a proper budget. This can't bankrupt us. You love this already. I love the challenge of it, Eliza corrected. But there was light in her eyes Adrian hadn't seen before, excitement breaking through her careful control. When do we start? Today? Today. She turned toward the house, already planning. I'll make a list of what we need to research. You should speak with the tenants, make sure they're comfortable with a school operating in the same building. We'll need their support. Eliza? She paused, looking back. Thank you, Adrian said, for being brave enough to defy him. Thank you for making it possible. She hesitated, then added quietly, I couldn't have done it alone. She went inside before he could respond, but Adrian stood there for several minutes anyway, watching the house that had felt like a tomb 6 weeks ago, and now felt like something alive, growing, becoming. They were building something, together. And for the first time since inheriting this disaster, Adrian felt something that might have been hope. The school consumed them both completely. Within a week, Eliza had visited 3 institutions in nearby towns, taken copious notes, and created a detailed plan that made Adrian's head spin. Within 2 weeks, they'd hired their first teacher, a young woman named Miss Caroline Webb, who'd been teaching at an overcrowded village school and looked ready to weep with gratitude at the opportunity. 20 students to start, Miss Webb said, reviewing the space they'd cleared in the East Wing, age 6 to 14. Mixed abilities. Some won't know their letters at all. Can you manage that range, Lex? Adrian asked. I can manage anything that isn't 40 students in a room built for 20. Miss Webb's smile was fierce. This is remarkable, what you're doing. Truly remarkable. The village response was mixed. Some families were enthusiastic, seeing opportunity for their children. Others were suspicious, convinced this was some elaborate scheme or that the education offered would somehow make their children unsuitable for their station in life. "You'll fill their heads with ideas," one father said bluntly when Adrian visited. "Make them dissatisfied with honest work." "I'd like to give them choices," Adrian replied. "Whether they choose farm work or trade work or something else entirely, that's up to them. But they should have the foundation to choose." "And you're doing this out of pure charity?" "I'm doing this because an educated community benefits everyone in it, including me." The man looked skeptical but didn't refuse outright, which Adrian counted as progress. Eliza was tireless, organizing everything from desk construction to book procurement to scheduling. She worked late into the night, candlelight visible in her room when Adrian passed by, always papers spread around her, always planning the next phase. "You need to sleep," he said one night, finding her in the library at past midnight. "I need to finish the supply inventory." But she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "The inventory will exist tomorrow." "Will it? Will all of this exist tomorrow?" Eliza's voice cracked slightly. "Or will I wake up and find out it was just another dream I had while trapped in my father's house?" Adrian sat across from her, recognizing the fear underneath her exhaustion. "It's real. We're building it together. What if we fail? What if the school doesn't work, or we run out of money, or people refuse to send their children? Or then we adjust and try something else." Adrian reached across the table, carefully taking her hand. "Failure isn't disaster, Eliza. It's just information about what doesn't work." She looked at their joined hands like she wasn't quite sure how they'd gotten there. "You're touching me. Is that all right?" "I don't know." But she didn't pull away. We haven't." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their unconsummated marriage hanging between them. 6 weeks of careful distance, separate rooms, a partnership that had somehow become more intimate than either of them had intended without ever becoming physical. "Do you want to?" Eliza asked suddenly, her voice barely audible. "Want to what?" "Consummate the marriage. Fulfill that aspect of the arrangement." She was looking at their hands, not his face. "My father's expectations, the heir requirement, all of that." Adrian felt his heart rate spike. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want." Eliza finally looked up, and there was something raw in her expression. "I know what's expected, what the contract requires. But I don't know. I've never—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I've never felt safe enough with anyone to want that. And now I'm confused." Her hand tightened slightly on his. "Because you've been kind, and you've defended me, and you've given me this school. And I don't know if that's enough reason to want someone, or if I'm just grateful and confusing gratitude with something else entirely." Adrian's chest ached. "That's honest." "It's pathetic. It's human." He squeezed her hand gently. "Eliza, I'm not going to push for anything you're not ready for. The heir requirement can wait. Everything can wait. We're building something good here. Let's not complicate it by adding expectations neither of us are prepared for. Most men wouldn't be so patient. Most men are idiots." She almost smiled. "You might be too patient. We do need an heir eventually. Eventually isn't tonight." Adrian stood, still holding her hand. "Come on. You need sleep more than you need inventory lists." He walked her to her room, their hands still joined like they'd forgotten how to let go. At her door, Eliza paused. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not—" She struggled for words. "For not treating me like an obligation." "You're not an obligation. You're—" He stopped, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. What was she? His wife, certainly. His partner. His ally in this strange endeavor they'd undertaken. Possibly his friend. Maybe, terrifyingly, something more. "I'm what?" Eliza asked quietly. "You're Eliza," Adrian said finally. "And that's enough." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then quickly, before either of them could overthink it, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, almost chaste, more surprise than passion, but when she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were wide. "I don't know why I did that," she said. "I'm not complaining." "It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change the arrangement." "All right." "I'm serious, Adrian. Don't read too much into it." "I won't." But he was smiling, and she was blushing, and they both knew something had shifted anyway. Eliza fled into her room, closing the door firmly behind her. Adrian stood there for several minutes, his heart doing something complicated in his chest, before finally returning to his own room where sleep took hours to find. The school opened on a cold October morning with 12 students. Not the 20 they'd hoped for, but 12 nervous children with varying degrees of literacy, all sitting at desks Adrian and Thomas had built, using materials Eliza had somehow procured at prices that still baffled him. Miss Webb stood at the front of the classroom, radiating nervous excitement. "Welcome," she said simply. "Let's begin." Adrian and Eliza watched from the doorway as the first lesson started. Basic letters for the youngest students, more advanced reading for the older ones. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. "We did this," Eliza whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did this," Adrian corrected. "I just helped fund it. We did it together." She leaned slightly against him, a rare moment of physical closeness she didn't immediately retreat from. "It's real. We actually built something real." Adrian put his arm around her shoulders, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. They stood there watching 12 children learn to read, and Adrian thought about how 6 weeks ago he'd been drowning in debt and despair, and now he was building schools with a woman who'd been a stranger and was becoming something else entirely. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "We keep going. We expand if it works. We adjust if it doesn't. We build. Together?" "Together." Eliza turned to look at him, her gray eyes searching his face for something. Reassurance, maybe, or confirmation that this wasn't temporary. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Trusting, depending on someone, letting things matter." Her voice dropped lower. "Letting you matter." "I'm not good at it either," Adrian admitted, "but we could learn if you want to try." "That's terrifying." "Most worthwhile things are." She smiled at his use of her own words. Then, deliberately, she took his hand again. The same gesture from the library, but different now. More intentional, more real. "All right," Eliza said. "Let's try." They stood together in the doorway watching their school begin its first day, holding hands like it was both the smallest and most significant thing in the world. And in the classroom, 12 children who'd had no prospects yesterday were learning their letters, proving that sometimes the most radical thing you could do was simply give people a chance. The future was uncertain. Money was still tight. Society would definitely talk. Eliza's father would never forgive them. But in that moment, watching possibility unfold in a converted East Wing, Adrian thought maybe they'd stumbled into something more valuable than respectability or financial security or meeting anyone's expectations. They'd found purpose, and each other, and each other. The thought terrified Eliza more than she wanted to admit. 3 months into the school's operation, winter settled over the estate with a brutality that tested everything they'd built. The roof held, barely, but heating costs devoured their careful budget. 2 students stopped coming because their families needed them working instead. Miss Webb caught a fever that kept her bedridden for a week, forcing Eliza to teach classes herself while managing everything else. "You're doing too much," Adrian said, finding her hunched over lesson plans at 2 in the morning, her 3rd night in a row without proper sleep. "Someone has to. Let me help." "You don't know how to teach." "Neither did you 3 days ago." Adrian pulled up a chair. "Show me what needs doing." They worked together until dawn, preparing lessons Eliza had no training for, making it up as they went. When the students arrived that morning, Adrian stood beside her at the front of the classroom, both of them exhausted and improvising, somehow making it work. "Mr. Hale can't spell," one of the older boys announced after Adrian wrote "receive" on the board with the letters reversed. "You're absolutely right," Adrian agreed, erasing it. "Who can show me the correct way?" 3 hands shot up. Eliza watched him learn alongside the students, admitting his ignorance without shame, and felt something in her chest crack open. This man who'd married her for money was teaching poor children how to spell, at 5 in the morning, after no sleep, without complaint. It wasn't what she'd expected from an arrangement. It wasn't what she'd expected from anyone. That night, she knocked on his bedroom door for the first time since they'd married. Adrian answered in his shirt sleeves, hair disheveled, looking surprised. "Eliza, is something wrong?" "No, I just—" She lost her nerve, started to turn away. "Never mind, this was stupid." "Wait," Adrian caught her hand. "Please, whatever it is." Eliza forced herself to look at him. "I don't want separate rooms anymore." The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications neither had been ready to address. "Are you certain?" Adrian asked carefully. "Because if this is about the arrangement, or your father's expectations, or anything other than what you actually want.
I don't know what I want. Eliza's voice came out frustrated. I've never known. My whole life has been other people's expectations.
But I know I don't want to keep living like we're strangers who happen to share a house. I know when you defended me against my father, something changed. I know teaching together this week has felt more intimate than anything I've experienced with another person. And I know that scares me, but being alone scares me more. Adrian stepped closer, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. This isn't just about fulfilling obligations. No. Once we cross this line, we can't uncross it. I know. Eliza. He lifted her chin gently until their eyes met. I need you to be sure, because I'm halfway in love with you already, and if you're not ready for that possibility, tell me now before I fall completely. Her breath caught. You can't be. Why not? Because we're a transaction. Because you barely know me. Because I'm difficult and angry, and I don't know how to be soft. I don't want you soft. I want you exactly as you are, brilliant and fierce and uncompromising.
Adrian's voice dropped lower. I've watched you resurrect a dying estate through sheer force of will. I've watched you build a school from nothing. I've watched you terrify creditors and charm students and stand up to your father. You're extraordinary.
How could I not fall in love with that? Eliza's eyes burned. I don't know how to do this.
Neither do I.
What if I can't be what you need? What if you're exactly what I need and you just don't see it yet? Adrian pulled her closer, slowly enough that she could retreat if she wanted. We don't have to know everything tonight. We just have to decide if we're willing to try. Eliza made her choice by closing the distance between them, kissing him with a desperation that surprised them both. It wasn't practiced or elegant, just raw need from two people who'd been alone too long, finding each other in the wreckage of their circumstances. Adrian's arms came around her, and for the first time in her life, Eliza felt safe enough to let go. Morning brought complications neither of them had anticipated. Eliza woke in Adrian's bed, her body warm against his, and immediately felt panic rising. This was real now. They'd crossed the line, changed the arrangement into something messier and more dangerous. I can hear you thinking, Adrian murmured against her hair. I'm always thinking. I've noticed. He shifted to look at her. Regrets? I don't know yet. Eliza traced patterns on his chest, avoiding his eyes. This wasn't supposed to be part of it. What wasn't? Feeling things, wanting things, caring if you... She stopped, unable to finish. Caring if I what? If you stay. The admission cost her. If this matters to you or if I'm just convenient. Adrian caught her hand, stilling its nervous movement. Look at me. She did, reluctantly. You're not convenient, he said firmly. You're complicated and challenging, and you make me work for every inch of ground. But you're also remarkable and brave, and you make me want to be better than I was. None of that is convenient, Eliza. It's just real. Real is terrifying. I know. He kissed her forehead gently. But we're doing it anyway. They stayed there another hour, learning the geography of each other, talking in fragments about fears neither had voiced before. By the time they finally left the bedroom, something had fundamentally shifted. They were no longer strangers performing roles. They were something new, undefined, possibly foolish. They were trying. Mrs. Talbot took one look at them at breakfast and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. The students noticed something different too. The way Adrian and Eliza stood closer together when observing lessons, the casual touches that had replaced careful distance, the way they finished each other's sentences when discussing school business. Are you and Mr. Hale sweethearts now? One of the youngest girls asked during a reading lesson. We're married, Eliza said, caught off guard. I know, but are you sweethearts? My parents are married, but they hate each other. You look like you might like each other. Eliza glanced at Adrian, who was trying very hard not to laugh. We might, she admitted. Is that all right with you? The girl considered seriously. I suppose, as long as you still have time to teach us. We'll make time. But making time became harder as winter deepened and reality pressed in. The school's expenses exceeded their projections. 3 more families withdrew their children, citing various reasons that boiled down to distrust of education disrupting the social order. And then Miss Webb announced she was leaving. A better position in London, more money, closer to family. We can't afford to replace her. Eliza said flatly, staring at the accounts that refused to balance no matter how many times she recalculated. Not at a salary that would attract qualified teachers. Then we teach, Adrian said. We're already teaching half the time while managing the estate and dealing with everything else. We can't do it all ourselves. We'll find a way. Stop saying that! Eliza's control finally snapped, months of pressure finding release. Stop pretending optimism solves problems. We're failing, Adrian. The school is failing. We don't have enough money, enough teachers, enough students who will actually attend. My father was right. This was a disaster waiting to happen. Your father was wrong about everything. Was he? We're drowning in debt again. The estate barely breaks even, and now we've added a school that's hemorrhaging money we don't have. She threw her pen down. We should cut our losses. Close it before we lose everything. No. That's not your decision alone. And it's not yours alone either. Adrian's voice went hard. We built this together. We decide together. And I'm not giving up because it's difficult. It's not difficult. It's impossible. Nothing we've done has been possible. Adrian stood, matching her energy. The estate was supposed to be beyond saving. Our marriage was supposed to be a cold transaction. You were supposed to stay trapped and miserable. But we changed all of that because we refused to accept impossible. Why stop now? Because I'm tired. The words ripped out of her. I'm tired of fighting for every inch of progress. Tired of pretending confidence I don't feel. Tired of acting like I know what I'm doing when I'm making it all up as I go. I'm exhausted, Adrian, and I don't know if I have enough left to keep going. The silence that followed was heavy with all the fears she'd been carrying. Adrian crossed to her slowly, pulling her into his arms despite her rigid resistance. Then rest. Let me carry it for a while. You can't watch me. He held her tighter. You've been driving this forward from the beginning. Let me take the weight. Trust me enough to lean. Eliza wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, to maintain the control that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she let herself collapse against him, months of exhaustion finding release in shaking sobs she couldn't contain. Adrian held her through it, offering no solutions, no platitudes, just steady presence while she fell apart. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy, and her eyes were swollen, and she felt stripped bare in a way that should have been humiliating, but somehow wasn't. I'm a mess, she said. You're human. Adrian wiped tears from her cheeks. And you're not doing this alone anymore. Partners, remember? Partners. So here's what we're going to do. I'll take over the school operations for the next month. You focus on the estate finances and nothing else. We divide the load properly instead of both trying to do everything. The students know me better. Then I'll learn. They adapted when you had to take over from Miss Webb. They'll adapt again. He kissed her forehead. Trust me, Eliza, please. It went against every instinct she had, every lesson she'd learned about relying only on herself. But she was too tired to fight anymore. 1 month, she agreed. But if it's not working, we adjust. Together. Adrian discovered teaching was significantly harder than he'd anticipated. The younger students were manageable, enthusiastic, easily impressed, thrilled when he did simple magic tricks with coins during mathematics lessons. The older ones were more challenging, testing his authority, questioning his knowledge, pushing boundaries to see where they were. Why should we learn Latin? Thomas, one of the tenant farmer's sons, demanded during a lesson. It's a dead language for dead people. Because it's the foundation of English, French, and Italian, Adrian replied. Understanding roots helps you understand meaning. That's what rich people say to justify useless knowledge. The other students waited to see how Adrian would handle direct challenge. You're right, Adrian said, surprising everyone. Latin is often taught as gatekeeping, a way to separate educated from uneducated, worthy from unworthy. But it doesn't have to be. Language is power, Thomas. The more languages you understand, the more you can access. Books, ideas, arguments you can make on your own behalf instead of relying on others to translate for you. So it's about power. Everything's about power. The question is whether you want to have it or let others keep it from you. Thomas considered this, then nodded slowly. All right. Teach us the power language. After that, the older students engaged differently, not as reluctant participants in someone else's project, but as co-conspirators in acquiring tools they'd been told weren't for them. Adrian found he loved it. He loved watching comprehension dawn on faces that had been taught they were stupid, loved the fierce debates that erupted over history and ethics, loved the moment when a struggling reader finally connected letters to meaning and looked up with pure joy. This was what Eliza had been trying to give them. Not charity, not condescension, just opportunity. He came home each evening exhausted and energized simultaneously, bursting with stories about student progress and classroom dynamics. Eliza listened with something that looked like relief, her own burden lightened by having someone else carry the school's weight. They challenged me on the value of poetry today, Adrian said over dinner. Said it was frivolous. What did you tell them? That poetry is how you say things that have no other words. That every revolution starts with someone finding language for what everyone felt but couldn't express. He paused. Then I had them write their own, about anything they wanted. How did that go? Thomas wrote about his father dying from preventable disease because they couldn't afford a doctor. Mary wrote about watching her brother go hungry so she could eat. Adrian's voice caught. They were devastating and beautiful and real. Eliza reached across the table, taking his hand. You're good at this. I'm learning from the best. They'd fallen into a rhythm, separate work during the day, coming together at night to share victories and frustrations, slowly learning how to be partners in every sense. The physical intimacy had deepened, but so had the emotional trust, each making the other more significant. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Adrian came home to find Eliza in the library, papers spread around her, looking triumphant. I found money, she announced. Where? Your parliamentary seat, the one you never activated. She pulled out documents. There's a small stipend for active members. Not much, maybe £300 annually, but it's something. And more importantly, it gives you a platform. A platform for what? For advocating for educational funding, for changing the laws that keep people trapped in ignorance. Eliza's eyes were bright with possibility. You're good with people, Adrian. You make arguments they understand. What if you took that to Parliament? What if our school became a model for something larger? That's ambitious. I'm feeling ambitious. She stood, crossing to him. We're already radicals. Might as well be useful radicals. Adrian pulled her close, marveling at how natural it felt now. You want to change the world. I want to change our small part of it. The world can follow if it wants. Have I mentioned you're extraordinary? Frequently, I'm starting to believe it might be true. He kissed her, and she responded with a hunger that still surprised him, this woman who'd been so carefully controlled now letting herself feel everything without reservation. They made love in the library, urgent and imperfect, books tumbling from shelves they knocked against, laughing at the absurdity and beauty of it. Afterward, lying on the floor wrapped in his coat, Eliza traced his jawline with gentle fingers. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Adrian's world stopped. What? I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. I wasn't certain until today, but she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a child. Joy and terror hit simultaneously. This was what the arrangement had required, what her father had demanded, what everyone expected. But it felt different now. Not an obligation to fulfill, but a consequence of something real they'd built together. How do you feel about it? Adrian asked carefully. Terrified. Thrilled. Sick most mornings. Eliza's laugh was shaky. Mostly terrified. My mother died in childbirth. I know the statistics. I know what can go wrong. Don't think about that. How can I not? Women die, Adrian, regularly, from something we're told is natural and beautiful, but is actually just dangerous. Her voice tightened. What if I die? What if the baby dies? What if... Stop. Adrian pulled her closer. We'll get the best care available. We'll be careful. You're strong and healthy, and you're not your mother. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll be there. Whatever happens, you won't be alone. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. The heir requirement will be fulfilled. Your obligation met. This isn't about obligation anymore. Isn't it? We married for practical reasons. This is just the practical outcome. Adrian heard the fear underneath her words, the terror that this pregnancy reduced her back to a transaction, that the child mattered more than she did, that she was just a vessel for someone else's legacy. Look at me, he said firmly. She did, reluctantly. I love you, Adrian said clearly. Not because you're pregnant, not because you managed the estate or built the school or fulfilled any requirement. I love you because you're brave and brilliant and you challenge me to be better. The baby is wonderful news. But you matter more. You will always matter more. Do you understand? Eliza's eyes filled.
You can't mean that. I absolutely mean it. Most men...
I don't care what most men think. I care what you need to hear, which is that you are not replaceable. Not by an heir. Not by anything. She kissed him then, desperate and grateful, and Adrian held her through it, trying to anchor her against the fear that had been taught by her mother's death and her father's callousness. "We'll be all right," he promised against her hair. "Both of us. All three of us." "You can't know that." "No, but I choose to believe it anyway." "Okay." They told no one at first, keeping the pregnancy secret while Eliza's body changed in ways she documented with clinical precision in a private journal. Morning sickness hit hard, forcing her to retreat from some duties, making Adrian the school's primary administrator. "You're doing too much," Mrs. Talbot said, finding Adrian preparing lessons at midnight. "You need rest. Eliza needs rest more. I can manage. You're exhausted, both of you. This pace isn't sustainable. What choice do we have? The school needs running, the estate needs managing, and Eliza can barely keep food down most mornings." Mrs. Talbot's expression softened. "So it's true then. She's with child." Adrian froze. "How did you—" "I've worked in houses for 30 years. I recognize the signs. Does anyone else know?" "No, we're not ready to announce it." "Because of her mother," Mrs. Talbot guessed. "The poor girl is terrified. She won't admit it, but yes. Get her a doctor, a good one. From London, if necessary. Women die from neglect as much as complications." The housekeeper's voice was firm. "Whatever it costs, it's worth it." Adrian knew she was right, but money was tight again despite Eliza's careful management. The school barely broke even. The estate income was stable but modest. A London doctor would strain resources they didn't have. He activated his parliamentary seat the following week. The stipend helped, but more valuable was the access it provided. Adrian met other reformers. People working on education bills, public health initiatives, social improvements. He learned which arguments worked, which politicians could be swayed, how to navigate bureaucracy toward change. And he brought those lessons back to the school, implementing changes, improving methods, slowly building something that could serve as a model for others. "You're good at this," one of his parliamentary colleagues said after Adrian presented arguments for public education funding. "Have you considered making it more than just a side project?" "It's not a side project, it's my life's work." "Then perhaps you should treat it as such. Run for election properly, build a coalition, actually change policy instead of just running one school." The idea planted itself in Adrian's mind, growing roots. He mentioned it to Eliza that night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his hand resting on her slightly swelling stomach. "You want to run for parliament?" she asked. "I want to expand what we're doing. One school helps dozens of students. Policy changes could help thousands. That would mean London part of the year, meetings, campaigns, time away from here." "I know." Eliza was quiet, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "My father would be thrilled. His son-in-law, a member of parliament, finally using those connections he paid for." "This isn't about your father." "Isn't it? He wanted social advancement through our marriage. This would give him exactly that." Adrian heard the bitterness in her voice. "We'd be using his investment against his principles, making the connections he wanted serve our purposes instead of his." "That's satisfyingly petty. I thought you'd appreciate it." She shifted to look at him. "You're serious about this?" "I think I might be. But only if you're with me. I won't do it if it means leaving you here alone, especially not now." Eliza's hand moved to her stomach, protective. "I'd come with you to London, at least until—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the fear. "Until the baby comes." "Yes. And after? I don't know. I don't know what happens after. If I survive—" "When you survive, if," Eliza insisted stubbornly, "if I survive, we'll have a child to care for, the school to manage, the estate, parliament. It's too much, Adrian. So we delegate. We hire people. We build systems that don't require us to do everything ourselves. That costs money we don't have. Then we find it. We make it. We do whatever's necessary." Adrian pulled her closer. "I'm not giving up what we've built, and I'm not losing you. We'll find a way to have all of it." "You're impossibly optimistic." "I learned from the best." Eliza smiled despite her worry. "That's a lie. You learned from me, and I'm a pessimist. You're a realist who refuses to accept limitations. There's a difference. 4 months into the pregnancy, Eliza finally consented to seeing a doctor. Dr. Richardson came from London, a woman in her 40s with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner that immediately won Eliza's trust. "Everything appears normal," Dr. Richardson said after the examination. "But you're underweight and showing signs of significant stress. That's a concern." "I'm managing an estate and a school," Eliza replied. "Stress is unavoidable. Manageable stress and dangerous stress are different things. Your body is already working hard growing a child. If you exhaust yourself further, you risk complications." "What kind of complications?" Dr. Richardson didn't soften the truth. "Early labor, placental problems, hemorrhaging during delivery. Your mother's death has clearly affected you." "My mother died because no one took her seriously when she said something was wrong." Eliza's voice went sharp. "They told her it was normal discomfort. By the time anyone listened, it was too late. Which is exactly why I'm telling you now. Reduce your workload. Rest more. Let others help. Your determination is admirable, but it can't prevent medical complications." After the doctor left, Eliza sat in the library, hands folded over her stomach, looking smaller than Adrian had ever seen her. "I have to step back from the school," she said quietly. "All right. I've been planning to launch a second-class level next month. We'd need more materials, more space, more— I'll handle it." "You're already handling too much." "Then we'll postpone it, or we'll find help. But you need to rest, Eliza. The baby needs you to rest." "I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to not work." Her voice cracked. "If I stop, if I slow down, all I have left is fear. And I can't live with that for 5 more months." Adrian knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Then work differently. Not less necessarily, but lighter. Consulting instead of doing. Planning instead of executing. Let the students come to you instead of you going to them." "That's not the same." "No, but it keeps you involved while protecting you both." Eliza looked at him with eyes full of terror she was trying very hard to hide. "What if it's not enough? What if I do everything right and still die anyway? Then I'll raise our child knowing their mother was extraordinary and brave and did everything she could." Adrian's voice was steady despite his own fear. "But that's not going to happen. You're going to survive this. We're going to survive this together. You can't promise—" "I can promise I'll fight for you. That if anything goes wrong, I'll choose you. Every time. Without hesitation." Something shifted in Eliza's expression. Not relief exactly, but a kind of desperate hope. "The child matters less than you do. Society can go to hell. You are my priority. Always." Eliza pulled him up, kissing him with a ferocity that spoke of fear and gratitude and love all tangled together. "Say it again. I love you. You matter more. I'll choose you. Promise." "I promise." Odds. 2 months before the baby was due, Edmund Rowan arrived unannounced with news that shattered their fragile peace. "I'm calling in the debt," he said without preamble, standing in their entrance hall like an avenging specter. Adrian felt his stomach drop. "What debt?" "The marriage settlement, £45,000, loaned to you upon marriage with the understanding of certain returns." Edmund pulled out papers. "There's a clause you apparently never read. If the marriage fails to produce a male heir within 2 years, the full amount becomes immediately due." "That's 15 months away," Eliza said, her hand protective over her swollen belly. "And I'm pregnant now, with a child of unknown sex. The clause specifies male heir." Edmund's smile was cruel. "And given your mother's history, there's no guarantee you'll even survive childbirth, much less produce the required son." "You bastard," Adrian said quietly. "I'm a businessman protecting my investment. This school nonsense, your parliamentary posturing, my daughter's radical ideas, none of it was part of our agreement. You were supposed to provide social connections and a legitimate heir. Instead, you've embarrassed the family name with this education project and haven't even managed the basic biological requirement yet." "Get out," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "I'll leave. But the debt stands. £45,000 due in 15 months if you fail to produce a son. Given the estate's current finances, I'd estimate you have about $10,000 in assets if you liquidate everything, which means you'll be bankrupted, the estate seized, and your precious school closed." Edmund turned to leave, then paused. "Perhaps you should have spent less time teaching gutter snipes and more time fulfilling your actual obligations." He left them standing in the wreckage of everything they'd built. Eliza's legs gave out. Adrian caught her before she fell, lowering her into a chair as she gasped for breath. "It's all right," he said, though it clearly wasn't. "We'll figure it out." "How?" "We don't have 45,000 pounds. We don't have half that. We don't have anything except this estate and a school we can barely afford to run. We have 15 months. We have however long I survive childbirth." Eliza's control finally shattered completely. "If I die, you get nothing except debt. If I live but have a daughter, you get debt. The only way you avoid catastrophe is if I successfully produce a son, and we both know those aren't good odds. Then we'll find another way. We'll negotiate. With my father? He doesn't negotiate. He wins, and he set this up so we can't possibly win." Adrian's mind raced through options, finding none that worked. Liquidating the estate would destroy everything, but wouldn't cover the debt. Borrowing would only compound the problem. Running would solve nothing. "We need a miracle," Eliza said flatly. "Or we need the baby to be a boy. And since miracles don't exist, we're gambling our entire future on something we can't control." She stood, swaying slightly, her hand pressed to her back. "Eliza, I need to lie down. I feel—" She took 2 steps toward the stairs and collapsed. Adrian caught her, blood already blooming across her dress, spreading with terrifying speed. "Mrs. Talbot!" His voice broke. "Get the doctor! Now!" He lowered Eliza to the floor, her blood warm and wet on his hands, her eyes wide with the knowledge that her worst fear was coming true. "Adrian, don't talk. Save your strength. The doctor's coming. The baby is going to be fine. You're both going to be fine." But blood kept flowing, pooling beneath her, and Eliza's face went increasingly pale, and Adrian held her there on the entrance hall floor, watching everything they'd built together drain away, knowing he might have to choose. And knowing exactly what that choice would be. Dr. Richardson arrived within the hour, her face grim as she assessed the bleeding that had finally slowed but not stopped. She worked in the guest room where they'd moved Eliza, her hands steady, while Adrian's shook uncontrollably. "Placental abruption," the doctor said quietly, washing blood from her hands. "Partial separation. The baby is still alive, but barely. If we don't deliver now, we'll lose them both." "It's too early," Adrian said. "She's only 7 months." "I'm aware. But the alternative is watching her bleed to death." Dr. Richardson's eyes were compassionate but unyielding. "The baby is small, underdeveloped. The odds aren't good for survival even if we deliver successfully." Adrian's world narrowed to a single point. "And Eliza? The delivery will be dangerous. She's already lost significant blood. Her body is weakened. There are risks of hemorrhage, infection, complications I can't predict." The doctor paused. "Mr. Hale, I need you to understand what I'm saying. If complications arise during delivery, I may have to make choices, quickly, without time for consultation." "What kind of choices? Between saving your wife or saving the child?" Dr. Richardson said it plainly, without euphemism. "I will do everything possible to save both. But if I can only save one, I need to know your priority." The question Adrian had been dreading since Eliza first told him she was pregnant. The choice that destroyed whatever option you didn't pick. "Eliza," he said without hesitation. "Save Eliza. The child could be male, the heir your arrangement requires. I don't care about the arrangement. I don't care about the debt, or the estate, or any of it. Save my wife." Dr. Richardson nodded slowly. "Does she know this is your decision?" "She knows." "Good. Because when she wakes up, she's going to ask, and you're going to have to live with whatever answer you give her." The doctor turned back toward the room. "I'll need hot water, clean linens, and someone with steady hands to assist. Can you manage that?" Adrian wasn't sure he could manage anything, but he nodded. The delivery took 4 hours that felt like 4 years. Adrian waited outside the room because Dr. Richardson had banned him, saying his panic would help no one. He paced the hallway while sounds filtered through the door. Eliza's screams, the doctor's calm instructions, periods of terrible silence that made his heart stop. Mrs. Talbot brought tea he couldn't drink. Thomas appeared from the gardens, hat in his hands, asking if there was anything he could do. Anna cried quietly in the kitchen. The students who'd stayed late for evening lessons huddled together, whispering prayers Adrian couldn't bring himself to echo. Then, finally, a sound he'd been terrified he wouldn't hear. A baby's cry. Weak and thin, but unmistakably alive. The door opened. Dr. Richardson emerged, exhausted and blood-spattered. "Your wife is alive," she said first, knowing that's what he needed to hear. Weak, but alive. The bleeding has stopped. And the baby? A girl, very small. She'll need careful monitoring, but she's breathing on her own. That's more than I expected, given the circumstances. A girl, not the male heir Edmund Rowan required, not the solution to their debt. Adrian found he didn't care even slightly. Can I see them? Briefly, your wife needs rest more than anything. Eliza lay pale and motionless in the bed, looking smaller than Adrian had ever seen her. The baby was wrapped in blankets beside her, a tiny thing with Eliza's dark hair and features too small to really distinguish yet. Adrian. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. He was at her side immediately, taking her hand carefully. I'm here. The baby? A girl, small but alive. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Not a boy. I don't care. Your father will call in the debt. We'll lose everything. I said I don't care. Adrian kissed her forehead gently. You're alive. Our daughter is alive. Everything else can burn. Easy to say now. Harder when we're bankrupted and homeless. We'll manage. How? I have absolutely no idea, but we will. He stroked her hair, careful of how fragile she seemed. Rest now. We'll figure out the rest later. Eliza's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion claiming her. Adrian sat beside the bed, watching her breathe, watching their daughter's tiny chest rise and fall, and tried to figure out how to save everything from the ruins of his choice. 3 days later, Edmund Rowan arrived to assess his investment's outcome. Adrian met him at the door, physically blocking entry. She's not receiving visitors. I'm not a visitor. I'm her father. You're a creditor who threatened to destroy us. You're not seeing her. Edmund's face hardened. I heard about the birth. A girl. How unfortunate for you. Get off my property. It won't be your property much longer. 15 months, Hale. Then everything becomes mine. Edmund smiled coldly. Perhaps you should have prioritized producing a son over playing schoolmaster. Adrian's fist connected with Edmund's jaw before conscious thought caught up. The older man staggered back, hand to his face, shock and fury warring in his expression. You struck me. I did, and I'll do it again if you don't leave. Adrian's voice was deadly calm. You endangered your daughter's life with your ultimatum. You showed up to gloat over her near death because it didn't produce the results you wanted. You're not a father. You're a parasite, and you're not welcome here. This is assault. This is self-defense against someone threatening my family. Now get out before I throw you out. Edmund backed toward his carriage, rage making him shake. You'll regret this. I'll ensure you lose everything. The estate, the school, whatever dignity you have left. You're finished, Hale. Then I'll be finished. But I'll be finished with my wife and daughter alive, and you nowhere near them. Edmund left in a storm of threats and fury, and Adrian stood there shaking with adrenaline and terror at what he'd just done. He'd assaulted his father-in-law, guaranteed the debt would be called in with maximum prejudice, destroyed whatever small chance of negotiation might have existed, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. That was stupid, Eliza said from the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. You should be in bed. I'm tired of bed. What did you do to my father's face? Hit it. Good. Eliza moved slowly into his arms. He deserved it, but now he'll destroy us. Let him try. Adrian, we have no plan, no money, no way to pay what he's demanding. Then we'll find one. He held her carefully, aware of how fragile she still was. How's our daughter? Sleeping, breathing, terrifyingly small. Eliza's voice caught. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Dr. Richardson says she's stronger than expected. For now. But she's so tiny, Adrian, so vulnerable, and we're about to lose the house we brought her home to. Adrian had no answer for that, so he just held her while their impossible situation pressed down on them both. The solution came from the most unexpected source. Thomas appeared 3 days later with a delegation, 10 men from the village and surrounding farms, all looking uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Mr. Hale, Thomas said formally, we heard about your trouble, about the debt. Adrian's heart sank. They'd come to withdraw their children from the school before it collapsed. He couldn't even blame them. I understand if you need to. We want to help. Thomas cut him off. We've been talking about what this school means, what Mrs. Hale did for our children, what you both risked to give them something better. We don't have money to repay you. We're not asking for repayment. We're offering investment. One of the other men stepped forward, a farmer named John who'd been skeptical of the school initially. My daughter can read now, can write her own name. She told me last night she wants to be a teacher someday. Before your school, that would have been impossible, unthinkable. Now it's just possible. We can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's investment in our children's futures. Thomas pulled out a folded paper. We've collected what we can. It's not much, maybe 800 pounds total, but it's a start. Adrian stared at the paper, not quite believing what he was hearing. You're giving us money? We're buying shares in the school, making it a community project instead of just yours. John's weathered face was serious. You'll pay us back eventually, when you can, with interest if that makes you feel better. But right now, our children need this school, and the school needs you not to be bankrupted by that bastard Rowan. That's my father-in-law you're talking about. Still a bastard. Thomas didn't apologize. Will you accept our help or not? Adrian felt something crack in his chest. Gratitude and humility, and the sudden understanding that they'd built something bigger than themselves without even realizing it. Yes, he managed. Thank you. The 800 pounds was nowhere near enough to cover Edmund's debt, but it was proof of something more valuable, that what they'd created mattered beyond their own survival. Word spread. More families contributed small amounts. A local businessman who'd been watching the school's progress offered a loan at reasonable rates. A London reformer Adrian had met through Parliament sent a donation with a note suggesting the school could serve as a model for a broader initiative if it survived. Piece by piece, they cobbled together a plan. Eliza recovered slowly, her strength returning in increments while their daughter, whom they'd named Charlotte, after no one in particular just because Eliza liked the name, grew incrementally larger each day. Dr. Richardson visited weekly, pronouncing both of them miraculously healthy despite the traumatic birth. You're lucky, the doctor said bluntly. Both of you. Most women don't survive what you went through. I know, Eliza said quietly. And most babies born that early don't make it past the first week. She's a fighter. She gets that from her mother, Adrian said. Eliza smiled slightly. Or her father, who punched his father-in-law. That was self-defense. That was assault. Glorious, satisfying assault. 6 weeks after Charlotte's birth, Adrian stood before Parliament presenting a proposal that had consumed every spare moment. A national education initiative modeled on their school, funded through a combination of public money and community investment, designed to provide basic education to children regardless of class. The response was mixed. Some praised the innovation. Others decried it as radical social engineering that would disrupt the natural order. But enough were interested to form a committee to investigate further to consider the possibility. And that consideration brought attention. Journalists visited the school, writing articles about the experiment in rural education. Reformers toured the facility, taking notes and asking questions. Other communities began inquiring about replicating the model. The school that had been hemorrhaging money suddenly became valuable, not financially, but as proof of concept for something larger. We could franchise it, Eliza said, reviewing correspondence from interested parties, license the model to other communities, charge consulting fees for implementation. It wouldn't be immediate money, but long-term it could generate significant income. You want to turn education into a business? I want to turn our specific approach into a sustainable system that doesn't require us to be personally bankrupt to maintain. She pulled out calculations. If even 10 communities implement versions of our model and pay modest licensing fees, that's £2,000 annually. 20 communities is $4,000. It scales. Adrian looked at her across the desk. This woman who'd nearly died bringing their daughter into the world, who'd been told by her father she was only valuable as a vessel for male heirs, who'd turned their desperate arrangement into something transformative. You're extraordinary, he said. I'm practical. There's a difference. You're both. Eliza colored slightly, still uncomfortable with praise despite months of marriage. The plan works mathematically. Whether it works practically depends on execution. Then we'll execute it. Adrian came around the desk, pulling her to her feet. Together. Always together. She kissed him, and he could feel her smiling against his lips. Even when it's impossible. Especially when it's impossible. The first licensing agreement came from a community in Yorkshire, a mill town where children worked 16-hour days and illiteracy was nearly universal. They wanted to implement the Hale model, adapted for industrial conditions, funded through a combination of mill owner contributions and worker fees. They're offering £300 for implementation support and licensing rights, Eliza reported. That's more than I projected. Take it. There are conditions. We'd need to visit, train their teachers, supervise the first few months of operation. We'll make it work. 3 more agreements followed in rapid succession. Each brought money, but more importantly, each brought validation that what they'd built wasn't just personal survival. It was reproducible, scalable, potentially revolutionary. Edmund Rowan's deadline loomed closer. 9 months remaining, then 6, then 3. The debt hung over everything, an impossible sword waiting to fall. But they kept building anyway. Charlotte grew from a frighteningly tiny infant to a small but sturdy baby who watched everything with Eliza's serious eyes and occasionally smiled with Adrian's unexpected warmth. The school expanded to 35 students across 2 age groups. The licensing agreements generated steady income. Adrian's parliamentary work gained traction, slowly building support for broader reform. It still wasn't enough to cover £45,000. 2 months before the deadline, Adrian received an unexpected letter. It was from a consortium of reform-minded aristocrats and businessmen who'd been following the school's progress. They proposed a formal investment structure, purchasing shares in what they termed the Hale Educational Trust, which would manage the school, licensing agreements, and future expansion. In exchange for £25,000 in immediate capital plus ongoing operational funding, they'd receive a stake in future profits and influence over expansion decisions. "It's not ideal," Adrian told Eliza. "We'd be giving up some control, but we'd have the money to pay my father." She reviewed the proposal carefully. "And it would formalize what we're doing, make it legitimate beyond just our personal project. You'd be comfortable with that? Outside investors having a say in how the school operates? If the alternative is losing it entirely?" "Yes." Eliza set the papers down. "Besides, the proposal includes provisions that we maintain operational control. They'd be more like partners than overlords." "Your father would hate this, us succeeding without his money." "Good. Let him hate it." Something fierce lit in Eliza's eyes. Let him watch us build something that doesn't need him, that succeeds specifically because we rejected everything he valued. Adrian signed the agreement the following week. The consortium transferred £25,000. Combined with the $8,000 they'd managed to save from licensing fees and careful estate management, it gave them $33,000, still $12,000 short of what Edmund demanded. "We need a miracle for the rest," Eliza said flatly. The miracle came in the form of Adrian's parliamentary seat. The stipend had been £300 annually, barely enough to matter. But the seat itself had value, specifically the voting rights that came with it. One of the consortium members, a businessman named Mr. Pembroke, who'd been trying to gain influence in Parliament for years, made an offer. "I'll pay £12,000 for the seat," Pembroke said bluntly. "You resign it to me. I assume it. Everyone's happy." "That seat is my political platform," Adrian protested, "which you can rebuild in the next election by running properly instead of just inheriting it. Take the money, pay off Rowan, and then actually work for a seat you earn rather than one you were born to." It meant giving up immediate influence for long-term possibility. It meant losing the platform he'd been using to advocate for reform. It meant starting over politically, but it meant survival. "I'll do it," Adrian said. Eliza grabbed his arm. "Adrian, your work in Parliament can continue. Just not immediately. We pay off the debt first. Then I run for election properly, build a real mandate instead of just inherited privilege. That could take years. Then it takes years. We're not losing the school. We're not losing the house. We're not giving your father the satisfaction of watching us fail." "You're sure?" "Completely." The transaction took another week to finalize. When it was complete, they had exactly £45,000, enough to cover Edmund's debt with nothing remaining. Adrian sent the payment by courier with a brief note. "Debt paid in full. Do not contact us again." Edmund's response arrived 3 days later, a single line in his precise handwriting. "You've accomplished nothing but postponing the inevitable. The child is still female. Your legacy still ends." Adrian burned the letter without showing it to Eliza. The school celebrated its 1-year anniversary with a demonstration for the investors and community. Students presenting what they'd learned, parents testifying to changes they'd seen, Miss Webb, who'd returned at a better salary, discussing curriculum developments. One of the older students, Thomas's daughter Mary, stood before the assembled crowd and read an essay she'd written about education as revolution. She was articulate, passionate, undeniably brilliant, everything the investors had hoped to see. When she finished, the applause was genuine. "Remarkable," Pembroke said to Adrian. "She'd have been working in a factory without this school." Or married off at 15 to escape poverty, Adrian agreed. Now she's talking about becoming a solicitor. A girl solicitor? One of the other investors sounded skeptical. Why not? She's certainly clever enough. Society won't. Society said we couldn't run a school for poor children on an aristocratic estate. Society said education across class lines would be chaos. Society is frequently wrong. Eliza appeared beside Adrian, Charlotte sleeping in her arms. Our job isn't to accept what society says is possible. It's to prove what's actually possible, regardless of what society thinks. The investor looked at her. This woman who'd nearly died making this school possible, who'd defied her father in social expectation and medical odds, and nodded slowly. I suppose you're proof of that, Mrs. Hale. We both are, Eliza corrected, her hand finding Adrian's. It's not about individual heroism, it's about partnership, about building something together that neither of us could have built alone. After the investors left, satisfied with their investment, Adrian and Eliza stood in the school's main room, watching the evening light paint long shadows across empty desks. We did it, Eliza said quietly. We actually survived. We did more than survive. We won. Did we? We're in debt to investors instead of my father. The school still barely breaks even. Charlotte is still a girl, which society will never forgive us for. Charlotte is perfect. The school is changing lives, and we're not in debt. We're in partnership with people who believe in what we're doing. Adrian pulled Eliza closer, careful not to wake the baby. Your father wanted us to fail, wanted to prove that defying him would lead to disaster. Instead, we built something he could never understand because it's not about power or control or legacy through bloodlines. It's about actually making things better for people who need it. That's remarkably idealistic. I learned from the best, Eliza smiled, leaning into him. We're not done yet. There's more schools to build, more students to teach, more work than we can possibly manage. Good. I'd be bored otherwise. You're impossible. You love me anyway. Unfortunately, yes. But there was no unfortunately about it, just acknowledgement that love had crept in when they weren't looking and now was foundational to everything they built. Charlotte stirred in Eliza's arms, making small sounds of waking. Adrian reached out, and his daughter grabbed his finger with tiny, determined hands, holding on like she had no intention of ever letting go. She's strong, Eliza observed, like her mother. Or her father, who rebuilt an entire estate while learning to teach and fighting off creditors. Or both. Adrian kissed Charlotte's forehead gently. She's going to do extraordinary things, and not because society expects it or some legacy demands it, but because she'll have the education and opportunity and support to become whoever she wants to be. That's what we're building, Eliza said. Not just schools, but possibility. For everyone who was told they didn't matter. Outside, the last students were leaving, calling goodbyes to each other and their teachers. In the distance, Thomas was closing the garden gates. Mrs. Talbot was starting dinner, humming something cheerful in the kitchen. The estate that had been dying was now thriving, not despite their unconventional choices, but because of them. They'd turned a transaction into a partnership, a marriage of convenience into love, a failing estate into a model for change. And they'd done it together. One of the London newspapers arrived later that week with an article about the school's success, featuring interviews with students and investors. The headline read, "The Hale Model, Education Reform from Unlikely Beginnings." Eliza read it aloud to Adrian while Charlotte dozed between them. What began as a small school on a struggling estate has become a blueprint for educational reform across England, she quoted. The Hale approach, combining community investment, sliding scale tuition, and practical curriculum, proves that education need not be limited by class or circumstance. We're famous, Adrian said dryly. We're validated. Eliza set the paper down. People are paying attention, taking us seriously. Does that change anything? It changes everything. It means we're not just an eccentric couple running a charity school. We're architects of a model that works, that others want to replicate, that your father will have to watch succeed. Yes. Eliza's smile was sharp. That might be my favorite part. The recognition brought more opportunities, speaking invitations, consulting requests, investment proposals. The impossible school that should have bankrupted them had instead become their fortune, proving that sometimes the most radical thing you could do was simply refuse to accept that caring about people who weren't like you was impractical. It was practical. It was profitable. It was revolutionary. And it had started with two people who'd married as strangers, united only by desperation, and somehow built something that mattered more than either of them had imagined possible. And it had started with two people who'd married as strangers, united only by desperation, and somehow built something that mattered more than either of them had imagined possible. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, the kind that announced importance before you even read the words. The Board of Education requests the honor of Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Hale's presence at a formal inquiry regarding the implementation of community-funded educational models across England. Eliza read it twice, looking for the trap. They want us in London to testify. About the school? About everything, the model, the financing, the outcomes. She set the invitation down carefully. This could legitimize what we're doing, make it official policy instead of just an experiment. Or they could tear it apart. Find flaws, declare it unsustainable, and shut down the whole initiative. Yes, Eliza looked at him directly. Are we ready for that scrutiny? Adrian thought about the past 2 years, the school growing from 12 students to 47, the licensing agreements now supporting 8 similar institutions across England, the families whose lives had demonstrably changed. Then he thought about the things they'd learned through failure, the curriculum adjustments after realizing their initial approach was too advanced, the financial near disasters before they'd implemented proper budgeting, the teacher who'd had to be dismissed for incompetence. We're not perfect, he said, but we're real. That has to count for something. They traveled to London 3 weeks later, Charlotte in Eliza's arms, now a year old and distressingly mobile. Mrs. Talbot had offered to watch her, but Eliza refused. She's part of this, Eliza insisted, part of why it matters. I'm not hiding her away like she's shameful. The inquiry was held in a government building that smelled like old wood and older power. Adrian and Eliza sat before a panel of 7 men, bureaucrats and politicians, and one clergyman who looked like he'd already decided they were dangerous radicals. The chairman, a gray-haired official named Lord Wessex, opened the proceedings without pleasantries. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, you've created something of a sensation with your educational experiment. It's not an experiment, Eliza corrected immediately. It's a working school that's been operating successfully for 2 years. A school that accepts students regardless of ability to pay, that teaches subjects some consider inappropriate for the lower classes, that employs unconventional methods. Wessex's tone made unconventional sound like a crime. Some would argue you're creating social disruption. Some would argue we're creating opportunity, Adrian replied. The disruption comes from denying it in the first place. One of the other panel members leaned forward, a younger man Adrian recognized from parliamentary sessions. Mr. Hale, your licensing model. You charge other communities for implementation rights? We charge consulting fees for expertise. We've spent 2 years developing effective curriculum and management practices. That knowledge has value. So this is profitable for you? It's sustainable for us, which means we can continue operating without relying on charity or going bankrupt. Sustainability benefits everyone. But you're making money from educating the poor. The clergyman spoke for the first time, his voice dripping disapproval. That seems morally questionable. Eliza stood abruptly, Charlotte on her hip. What's morally questionable is keeping people ignorant because educating them might disrupt your comfort. We're not running a charity. We're running a school that works because we've made it financially viable. Would you prefer we bankrupt ourselves trying to help people, then fail and help no one? Mrs. Hale, please sit. No. Eliza's voice cut through the room like a blade. You invited us here to judge whether what we've built is legitimate. Fine. Judge it. But don't pretend the question is about money when the real question is whether you believe poor children deserve education at all. The room went silent. Charlotte chose that moment to grab at Eliza's necklace, babbling happily, completely oblivious to the tension. Your daughter, Wessex said, his tone shifting slightly. She's the child you nearly died delivering, the one your father-in-law declared worthless for being female. Adrian's jaw tightened. How do you know that? We investigated your background thoroughly, including the rather public dispute with Edmund Rowan about heirs and debts. Wessex's expression was unreadable. You chose your wife over the child, over the male heir that would have solved your financial problems. I chose my wife because she matters more than any inheritance. Adrian stood as well, moving beside Eliza. And our daughter isn't worthless. She's proof that value isn't determined by gender or bloodline or meeting someone else's expectations. Noble sentiments. But practically speaking, you're now raising a girl who cannot inherit your title, cannot carry on your family name in the traditional sense. Some would say you've ended your lineage for nothing. My lineage was dying anyway, Adrian shot back. My father drank it away. I inherited debts and ruins. If my legacy ends with me, at least it ends with me having built something instead of just managing decline. Wessex studied them both for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Sit down, both of you. Let's discuss what you've actually accomplished instead of debating philosophy. The tone shifted. For the next 3 hours, the panel questioned them about specifics: enrollment numbers, curriculum details, financial models, student outcomes. Eliza produced documentation for everything, her preparation transforming what could have been hostile interrogation into something closer to academic review. We've tracked literacy rates among our students, she explained, spreading charts across the table. After 1 year, 83% can read at a basic level. After 2 years, 62% read at what we'd consider functional proficiency. That's compared to roughly 30% literacy in comparable communities without structured education. And the cost per student? One panel member asked. Approximately £15 annually, including all materials and teacher salaries. Families pay on a sliding scale from nothing to £5 based on ability. The difference comes from licensing fees and investor support. That's remarkably low. That's remarkably efficient, Eliza corrected. We don't waste money on unnecessary facilities or inflated administrative costs. We pay teachers fairly but not extravagantly. We use what works and cut what doesn't. The clergyman who'd been hostile earlier cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, I must ask, what do you say to critics who claim you're teaching these children to be dissatisfied with their station in life? Eliza met his eyes steadily. I say their station in life was assigned by circumstance, not merit. If education makes them dissatisfied with poverty and ignorance, then good. Dissatisfaction drives change. And change is exactly what England needs if we want to be a nation that values all its people, not just those born to privilege. That sounds like revolution. That sounds like progress, though I understand those can look similar to people comfortable with the status quo. Adrian half expected them to be thrown out. Instead, several panel members were smiling. You're quite direct, Mrs. Hale, Wessex observed. I found it saves time. The inquiry concluded without formal decision, but the tone had shifted from hostile investigation to genuine interest. Wessex pulled Adrian aside as they were leaving. Unofficially, he said quietly, we're going to recommend your model for broader implementation. There will be a formal education reform bill introduced next session. Your approach will likely serve as the template. Adrian's heart skipped. You're serious? Completely. You've proven something works that most people said was impossible. That's politically valuable. Wessex paused. I'd suggest you consider running for Parliament again, properly this time. We need voices like yours and your wife's shaping policy, not just implementing it at local level. I sold my seat to pay debts, then earn a new one. Stand for election, build support, win. The possibility hung there, tempting and terrifying. That evening, they stayed in a London hotel. Nothing extravagant, but clean and comfortable. Charlotte finally asleep, Adrian and Eliza lay in bed, processing what had happened. They're going to use our model, Eliza said, still sounding slightly disbelieving. Make it national policy. If the bill passes, it will pass. Wessex wouldn't have suggested it otherwise. She turned to face him. We actually did it, Adrian. We changed something. Not just for our students, but potentially for thousands of children we'll never meet. You did it. You're the one who built the systems, proved the model worked. We did it together. I couldn't have done any of it without you defending me against my father, supporting the school when it seemed impossible, choosing me over the heir. Her voice softened. I was wrong that first day. This isn't just a transaction anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. What is it? A partnership, a marriage, a life. Eliza's hand found his in the darkness. I love you. I don't think I've said that clearly enough, but I do, completely. Sometimes inconveniently. Adrian pulled her closer. Inconveniently? You make me care about things I'd protected myself from caring about. Make me hope when I'd learned hope was dangerous. Make me vulnerable when I'd spent my whole life building armor. She paused. It's terrifying. I know. You think I'm not terrified too? You always seem so certain. I'm absolutely making it up as I go, but I'm certain about you. He kissed her forehead gently. About us. about what we're building together. They held each other in the quiet hotel room, and Adrian thought about how far they'd come from that first cold meeting in her father's Mayfair house. Two strangers negotiating a transaction that had somehow become everything that mattered. The bill came before Parliament 6 months later. Adrian attended as a spectator, sitting in the gallery while members debated the Education Access Act, legislation that would provide government funding for community schools modeled explicitly on the Hale approach. Eliza sat beside him, Charlotte sleeping against her shoulder, both of them barely breathing as the arguments flew. "This is social engineering," one opponent shouted. "Government interference in natural social order." "This is investment in England's future," a supporter countered. "Every child educated is a potential contributor instead of a burden. It's economics, not ideology." The debate raged for hours. Adrian watched members he'd worked with, argued with, slowly convinced over months of advocacy and demonstration. He saw the moment the tide turned, when a skeptical lord stood to speak, then surprised everyone by supporting the bill. "I visited one of these Hale schools," the lord said. "In a mill town in Yorkshire. I expected chaos, inappropriate mixing of classes, children being taught above their capacity." He paused. "What I found was order, purpose, children learning skills that made them more valuable to their families and communities. It works. Whatever our philosophical objections, we cannot ignore results." The vote wasn't even close. The bill passed with a substantial majority. Adrian and Eliza stood with everyone else as the result was announced, then looked at each other in stunned silence. "We won," Eliza whispered. "We won." They left the gallery quickly, before emotion could overwhelm them in public, and stood outside the Parliament building while London rushed past. "This is real," Eliza said. "Actual policy. Government funding. National implementation. This is everything we fought for, everything we almost died for." She shifted Charlotte in her arms. "Everything we chose over safety and expectation and doing what we were supposed to do." Adrian thought about his father's estate, slowly dying from neglect and resignation. About Eliza's father, who'd tried to destroy them for defying his control. About the countless people who'd said their school was impossible, impractical, dangerous. "They were all wrong," he said. "They were all terrified of change. We just weren't." "Oh, I was terrified. Still am, honestly," Eliza laughed. "Me too, but we're doing it anyway." The implementation of the Education Access Act took 2 years and was messier than anyone anticipated. There were funding disputes, administrative tangles, communities that resisted change, and endless bureaucratic complications. Adrian and Eliza found themselves traveling constantly, consulting with new schools, training teachers, troubleshooting problems, fighting for proper resource allocation. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It was extraordinary. 3 years after the bill passed, there were 47 community schools operating across England using their model. Literacy rates in those communities were climbing measurably. Children who would have been working in factories at age 10 were instead learning mathematics and history. The results were undeniable, and Edmund Rowan was forced to watch it all happen. He appeared at the estate one final time, uninvited and unwelcome, 4 years after Adrian had punched him. "You've made quite a name for yourself," Edmund said, standing in the entrance hall where he'd once threatened bankruptcy. "The education reformers. The model for change. Was there something you wanted?" Adrian kept his voice neutral, though his fists clenched. "I wanted to see what my £45,000 had purchased, whether my investment had been worthwhile. You were repaid. We owe you nothing. Monetarily, no. But I'm curious, was it worth it? Marrying my daughter for money, nearly losing everything, building this school that's consumed your lives. You could have just produced a male heir, kept the money, lived comfortably. Instead, you chose this." Edmund gestured vaguely at the school wing. "Chaos, controversy, constant struggle." Eliza appeared from the library, Charlotte at her side now, a 4-year-old with dark hair and braids and her mother's serious expression. "We chose purpose over comfort," Eliza said coldly. "We chose building something meaningful over inheriting something dead. And yes, it was worth it. Every struggle, every risk, every moment you told us we were failing." "And your legacy? You still have no male heir. Your daughter cannot carry on the family name. Charlotte will carry on our actual legacy, the work we've done, the changes we've made, the lives we've improved." Eliza pulled her daughter closer protectively. "That matters more than a name on documents." Edmund looked at his granddaughter, the child he'd declared worthless, studying her with something that might have been regret. Charlotte stared back fearlessly. "You have your mother's eyes," Edmund said quietly. "And her courage," Adrian added, "and her intelligence, and her refusal to accept limitations." "She's 4 years old. You can't possibly know." "We know she's growing up in a house where education matters more than bloodlines, where work matters more than status, where being female doesn't mean being worthless." Eliza's voice was steel. "That's more than I had growing up in your house." Edmund flinched slightly. For a moment he looked old, diminished, a man who'd built everything on power and control, watching his daughter flourish specifically because she'd rejected both. "I didn't come here to fight," he said finally. "Why did you come?" "To tell you I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him. "About the school, about education disrupting social order, about your daughter being worthless. I was wrong about all of it." Eliza stared at him, disbelief warring with something that might have been pain. "You think that fixes anything? You think admitting you were wrong erases what you did?" "No, I know it doesn't." Edmund's voice was quiet. "But I wanted you to know anyway, that I see what you've built, that it's remarkable, that you were right to defy me. I don't need your approval. I know, which is exactly why you deserve it." He left before either of them could respond, walking to his carriage with shoulders slightly hunched, looking more defeated than angry. Adrian found Eliza in the rose garden later, the plants now thriving under years of care, blooming in defiant color. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know." She was pulling weeds with unnecessary force. He apologized. "Sort of. And I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it. Part of me wanted him to see we'd succeeded, to admit he was wrong, to recognize what we built." Eliza ripped out another weed. "But now that he has, it feels hollow, like his approval doesn't actually matter anymore." "Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you've moved past needing it." "When did that happen?" "Gradually. While you were too busy building something real to notice you'd stopped caring what he thought." Adrian knelt beside her, stilling her restless hands. "You won, Eliza. Not just the bill or the schools, you won your own freedom from needing his validation. That's bigger than any policy change." She looked at him, eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. "We won." "Yes, together." Charlotte appeared from the house, running toward them with the unsteady enthusiasm of a 4-year-old, calling, "Mama! Papa! Miss Webb says there's kittens in the stable!" Eliza caught her daughter, swinging her up with practiced ease. "Does she now? Can we keep one? Please?" "We'll discuss it," Adrian said, the parents' eternal deflection. They walked back to the house together, Charlotte chattering about kittens between them, and Adrian thought about legacy, not the kind Edmund Rowan had valued, passed through bloodlines and inheritance, but the kind they were building through work and choice and change. This was legacy. This moment, this family, this school full of children learning they mattered. These policies spreading across England because 2 people had refused to accept that caring about others was impractical. 5 years later, Adrian won his parliamentary seat through proper election, campaigning on education reform and community investment. Eliza managed their expanding network of schools while writing policy recommendations that actually got implemented. Charlotte started attending their own school, learning alongside children from every background, proving daily that opportunity mattered more than birthright. The estate thrived. The rose gardens bloomed. The school that had started with 12 nervous students now served 97, with waiting lists and expansion plans. They never had more children. Pregnancy remained too dangerous for Eliza, and they decided one extraordinary daughter was enough. Charlotte would inherit everything: the estate, the school, the network they'd built. She'd carry it forward not because of her gender or despite it, but simply because she'd been raised to believe she could. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Adrian and Eliza stood in the school's main hall during a celebration. Former students spoke about how education had changed their lives. Thomas's daughter Mary, now training to be a solicitor, one of the first women attempting it. A young man who'd become a doctor, returning to serve his community. A girl who'd started a business, hiring women from the village at fair wages. "None of this would exist without you," Mary said, addressing Adrian and Eliza directly. "You didn't just teach us to read. You taught us we deserved to read, that we deserved opportunity and choice and futures we'd design ourselves. You changed everything." After the celebration, after the guests left, after Charlotte was finally asleep, Adrian and Eliza stood in the entrance hall where they'd first brought her home, where Eliza had nearly died, where everything had almost ended. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't married?" Eliza asked. "You'd probably still be trapped in your father's house. I'd probably have lost the estate to bankruptcy. And the school would never have existed. All those students would have different lives. Worse lives, probably. Or just different. We can't actually know." Eliza leaned against him, comfortable in a way that had taken years to develop. "But I'm glad we don't have to find out." "Me too." Adrian thought about that first meeting in her father's drawing room, two desperate people negotiating a transaction. How they'd approached marriage as a business arrangement, carefully maintaining distance, convinced love was for people with better options. How wrong they'd been. "I love you," he said, because it still felt important to say clearly. "I love you too. Even though you're impossible. Even though you're terrifying. Especially because we're both those things." Eliza turned in his arms, looking at him directly. "We built something, Adrian. Not just the school. Us. We built us from nothing, from a transaction, from two people who didn't know how to trust anyone. And we turned it into this. Partnership. Love. Revolution, apparently, according to that one critic. All of it." She kissed him, and it still felt like discovery despite 10 years of practice. "We didn't inherit a legacy. We built one. Together." Outside, the estate that had been dying was thriving. The school that had been impossible was expanding. The students who'd been told they didn't matter were proving everyone wrong. The marriage that had started as cold transaction had become the foundation everything else built on. They hadn't saved each other. That would be too simple, too neat. They challenged each other, pushed each other, refused to let each other accept defeat or resignation or the limitations other people tried to impose. They'd chosen partnership over isolation, purpose over comfort, building over inheriting, each other over everything else. And from those choices, they'd created something that would outlive them both. Not a bloodline or a title or a name in history books, but actual change. Real impact, lives improved, futures expanded, possibilities created where none had existed before. Charlotte would inherit that, would carry it forward, would probably expand it in ways they couldn't imagine because she'd been raised to believe limitation was just another problem to solve. That was legacy, not what you were born to, but what you built, what you chose, what you changed. 10 years ago, Adrian had stood in a solicitor's office being told his only option was marriage to a stranger. 10 years ago, Eliza had sat in her father's house, angry and trapped, certain her life would be nothing but obligations fulfilled and dreams deferred. Now they stood in a school they'd built together, in an estate they'd resurrected, surrounded by evidence that the impossible was just difficult, and difficult was manageable with the right partner. "We should go to bed," Eliza said practically, though she made no move to leave his arms. "We should. Charlotte will be up early demanding pancakes. Undoubtedly. And we have 3 school visits scheduled this week. I remember. So we really should sleep." "Absolutely." Adrian kissed her forehead. "In a minute." They stood there together in the quiet house, holding each other, grateful for every risk they'd taken, every convention they'd defied, every moment they'd chosen partnership over safety. They'd built a legacy, not inherited, not purchased, not defined by blood or gender or social expectation. Built. Together. From nothing but desperation and determination and the stubborn refusal to accept that caring about others was impractical. It was the most practical thing they'd ever done. And it was everything.